Can I just advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings as well as online. Everybody in the public gallery, welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and must be muted. Not permitted to take photos during the meeting. We have no apologies. Has anybody got any apologies? No, none. And we have Linda or Leah and I think Nuala online. Okay, Chair's business. So just to let everybody know, we were due to be briefed today by the Interim Protection Board and the SPPG on the Adult Protection Bill this afternoon. However, due to illness, that briefing isn't going to happen today. It will be rescheduled in the coming weeks. Also, can I just mention the launch of the Palliative Care Hub in the Belfast Trust in the Long Gallery yesterday. So, I mean, that will clearly be of interest to this committee, given the vast work that we did on the palliative care. And can I commend the Belfast Trust for the hub? I mean, it is setting out some of the stuff, I was going to say a lot of the stuff, but certainly setting out some of the stuff that we had identified as problems in terms of key one point of contact, easy access for families in terms of navigating the system. So, I mean, while I was listening to it and thinking how good it was for the Belfast Trust, I was thinking, is it something that we should maybe potentially write to the department about to see if there's engagement with the other trusts as well? Yeah. Happy to do that. Okay, also I had a visit with the members of Young Lives versus Cancer yesterday as well. I visited their facility just at College Green on the far side of the Students' Union for anybody attended Queen's in their young days. Amy's House, a really good facility. They also have Paul's House up the Falls Road, and I mean both these facilities are about allowing space for families and young people with cancer to get a bit of respite while their family members are going through treatment. So wonderful facility. They do an awful lot of good work. So I just want to congratulate them on the work that they do. And also then lastly, just in Chair's business, can I remind members to respond to the committee staff in regards to attendance at the Antrim Hospital visit next Thursday, just 29th at 11 a.m. in advance of our committee. Okay, moving on to draft minutes. Can I refer members to draft minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of January? They're at page 5 of the main pack. Everybody content? Mm-hmm. Okay. Matters arising. Members, or just to let you know, the urgent briefing that we talked about last week, the oral briefing, with the independent healthcare providers is due to take place at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, the 27th of January, room 21. So this session is scheduled to last an hour. I know that the Health Minister has a statement for 11 o'clock, so it gives us an hour. But it's a very important oral briefing that we have asked for, and it will provide members with the opportunity to hear directly from independent care providers on the issues relating to community care, and we've been discussing this in the committee and in the chamber and asking the Minister questions about it and debating about it for the last couple of weeks. So I think it's a really important opportunity to hear from the independent care providers. So the pack for the meeting has already been delivered, so that's good to have well in advance of the meeting. And as per the committee's request, we have also scheduled the Permanent Secretary of the Department to brief the committee on patient flow and community care on Thursday the 5th of February. So it'll be good to meet and hear from the independent care providers and then from the Permanent Secretary. Item number 5, Adult Protection Bill. So we've received correspondence on the bill on some of our deliberations thus far from the Department. Can I refer members to the correspondence regarding Adult Protection Bill at tab 5? It's page 28 of our pack. I'm going to ask Michael just to give us a briefing on that and take us through it.
Yep, no problem. So members, you'll recall we had the meeting on December the 4th where the GP stakeholders were up and sort of introduced this issue of clause 2 within the bill and how an adult at risk is defined and whether that should include adults with capacity and without capacity or only adults who do not have capacity. So the argument put forth from the GPs was that it should only cover adults who do not have capacity as per the Mental Capacity Act. And their argument was very strongly in favour of an amendment in that regard, which I think members were quite taken by, and we decided to write urgently to the department asking for their feedback on the evidence shared from the GP. So we had asked for that before Christmas, but they needed to take some additional legal advice, so it's only came through to us last Thursday. So that's at page 29, as the chair has mentioned. So I'll just try and give a brief summary. So as you recall, the position from the BMA and the Royal College of GPs was very much that if it's deemed that the adult has capacity to make their own decisions, even if that's a decision that perhaps the medical professional disagrees with, if they have capacity and they're not consenting to be referred on to another statutory agency, sort of the case would end there, because they have to retain that ability to take their own decisions if they're deemed to have capacity. When we spoke to the GMC at the last meeting, their interpretation of the bill as drafted was that the approach would be a bit more nuanced, so they set out in their evidence a sort of suggested step-by-step approach of the steps that a medical professional might go through to use their professional judgment and weigh up all of the circumstances of each individual case, and all factors, make sure that that is clearly documented, and then take the decision on a sort of a case-by-case basis, where there are those sort of exceptional circumstances where it is deemed that somebody has capacity to make their own decisions but does not want and does not consent to being referred on to another statutory agency. Then in those certain circumstances, if it was deemed by the medical professional that, for example, they would be preventing harm to others, or if they were suspicious of perhaps coercion, it would be a case-by-case basis, and in those circumstances then the right to the confidentiality could be overrided, and that person could be referred on. Now, those would only be certain circumstances, but the GMC certainly said that they were clear, and their discussions with the department were clear, that the intention is to leave this up to the professional judgment of the medical professional on a sort of a case-by-case basis. And the GMC also said that they had met with the department's bill team, and that was expressed to them that that was the intention of the department when they were wording the bill as it is currently worded. So now, with that context, we have the response from the department with the feedback to the position of the GPs. The position of the GPs was that if we amended Clause 2 as they suggested, that would not fundamentally change the rest of the bill. So the department disagree with that. They're saying that if we amended Clause 2, we would be changing whole parts of the section that covers the Adult Protection Board, for example. That would then only be able to cover people who did not have capacity, so that would make it a much narrower scope. And also, for example, the part that deals with CCTV mentions that it deals with establishments that deal with adults at risk. So if you were saying that an adult at risk is only somebody who does not have capacity, again, you would be very much narrowing the scope of the bill in that regard. So the department are basically saying that if you went with an amendment in that regard, it would sort of be making the bill too much like a Mental Capacity Act Part 2, which is certainly not what their policy intention is, and that they have taken legal advice from OLC and DSO, who have been in agreement with the bill as they have it worded, that also the department's transformation board, who are the sort of project board working on the bill, have considered the evidence from the GPs and still come to the same conclusion that the bill as drafted, in their view, should stay that way, and that it should be sort of left up to that individual judgment of the medical professional on a case-by-case basis. Now, the GMC did say in their evidence that they would like to see that very clearly spelt out in the statutory guidance that comes alongside the bill that we're still waiting on. So I suppose that's sort of where we are with the department's response. Another thing that the GPs groups, the BMA and the Royal College had mentioned, was that their engagement with the department had been very limited, and that they had only found out about the bill and these issues sort of their own accord. So the department have disagreed with that and put forward evidence of some meetings that they had with the BMA, and also the consultation responses that they got from the BMA and the Royal College before, where these issues were sort of touched upon but not raised with the level of severity that I suppose they were raised with in the evidence before Christmas. So the department have given a commitment that they're going to reach out and engage further with the BMA and the Royal College going forward. The department have also said that one of the things that was mentioned was that the stakeholders from the GPs groups had not seen the bill text, but the department have said that that would not be procedure to allow groups like that to see the bill before members had seen it, so that would not usually be the case. So I suppose that's the response from the department summed up a little bit. It's not the case that members need to take any decisions on this at this point in time. It's just to sort of have you thinking about the information that you've got about this clause so far for when the department are up, which will be for the first session on the 12th of February. This is something then that we can explore with them more. So you just need to really start to think about whether you're still thinking about the amendment as proposed by the GPs groups, whether you're sort of in agreement with what the department have put forward and maybe what GMC were saying last week, that it's a bit more nuanced and that there could be clear guidance set out in the statutory guidance that comes, which will sort of deal very clearly, put it that these issues need to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. So that's really where members need to be thinking at the moment, so that when, in 2 or 3 weeks' time, when we come back to look at potential amendments and deliberations on the bill, that you maybe have a clear picture of what your views would be on the second clause.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. That's been very useful. Just given, I mean, don't really want to open it up because it's essentially for information. We will have 2 or 3 weeks to digest that and the other issues that we're hearing before the department. But clearly, this is an important bill, and it would be really good that the bill had consensus by those proposing the policy changes and those operating it. So I would hope that the department meets with the BMA in advance of them coming here, so that we could get a clear signal at that meeting of how those discussions are going, and if there is some resolution between, I'm not using the word protagonist, but the two different opinions, because what we really want is this bill having the agreement of as many people as possible, particularly those who are going to be charged with operating it.
Can I get a bit of point of clarification just on something Michael said? Whenever you said there was some part that the department didn't want stakeholder groups to see before we had seen it, what bit is it that we haven't seen yet? Because if we've got the department coming up in a fortnight, we'd like to think that we've got everything well in advance of that.
Yeah, so that aspect was purely in terms of the text of the bill. So the text of the bill, we all have it, it's in the public domain at this point. So I think what the department were responding to was the notion that they would have shown how they had worded this clause to stakeholders like the BMA and the Royal College in advance.
I just thought there was something we hadn't seen yet,
Yeah.
and that was, but okay, I get you now, that's fine. Yeah, thank you.
Linda, you're looking in?
I think it's actually sort of just been covered in terms of the, well, it doesn't. In terms of the text, yes, I understand that they wouldn't have seen the actual text. The legislation comes to the members first. That's all clear and straightforward. But what kind of engagement did they have that they didn't know this? I mean, these are exactly the type of conversations you have with stakeholders before you draft legislation, or whilst you're drafting legislation, to make sure that the legislation is fit for purpose. So I suppose I do think that some of those conversations, but this is our opportunity, hopefully, to address it.
Yeah, the department are up on the 12th of February, Linda, for the first time, and will be for several weeks. So that would really be the forum for you to tease out with them more what those conversations look like, and how they've come to the wording of the bill as it is currently.
No, thank you very much.
Okay.
Sorry, Philip, there was just another piece of correspondence at page 33 in the same section to direct members to, that came from the Committee for Justice. So something we had also done was written to the Committee for Justice for their views on the bill, because some aspects of it will overlap. And they've sort of written to the Department of Justice and forwarded that response that they've got back to us. So that's in members' packs. But what the department have suggested that the Committee for Justice will do is seek further views from the PSNI, the Harbour Police, the Probation Board, the PPS and the Policing Board. So we have had the PSNI and the Probation Board submit responses to the committee's call for evidence already. So they may wish to submit further evidence, but the Committee for Justice are going to write to those other groups as well. to seek any views that they would have. So we'll be looking out for the response when that comes from all of those separate stakeholders as well.
Good enough. The policing board will be well versed, given that the crossover between policing board and this committee.
Absolutely.
Okay, moving on then. Item number 6, the oral briefing on adult protection bill action for Muckamore. So I refer members to our papers, page 39, tab 6 of our pack. And can I welcome Ms. Catherine Fox, representative from Action for Muckamore, and Mr. Glynn Brown, representative from Action for Muckamore.
Hello, everybody.
So you are very welcome. Thank you very much for taking your time to come before the committee. And obviously, this committee is very engaged with what's going on in terms of the inquiry, and we will have a keen interest in that. And certainly, thanks to the families for shedding light on some of the issues that have come to light, horrific issues have come to light, and obviously that a lot of what the bill we're doing follows on from that inquiry. Today is specifically around the bill, so hopefully we can keep it strictly to as closely as possible to the bill and the lessons that we can learn, and supporting some of the things that you as families have encountered. So I'm going to hand over to yourselves just for some opening remarks, and then we'll go around the committee in terms of asking questions.
Obviously, we had so much in our mind. We've wrote a lot, committed to the paper, so that we don't get waylaid and miss out bits and come out of the meeting saying I should have said this, I should have highlighted that.
Absolutely.
So if no further ado, we'll commence. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. We're speaking on behalf of Action for Muckamore, a group formed by families whose loved ones were patients at Muckamore Abbey Hospital. We are here because what happened there was not an isolated failure. It was a predictable outcome of a safeguarding system that does not enforce its own rules. We support the introduction of an adult protection bill. The need for this legislation has been clear for many years. As far back as 2014, following failures at Cherry Tree Care Home, the Commissioner for Older People called for stronger adult protection. More than a decade later, families are still describing the same failures, the same gaps, and the same harm. Today, we want to focus on 4 areas that must be strengthened if this bill is to be genuinely protect vulnerable adults. That being CCTV, culture, independent advocacy and training, investigations and adherence to procedures with proper oversight. Before addressing these areas, it's essential to be clear about the core problem in adult safeguarding in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland already has a regionally agreed adult safeguarding policy and operational procedures. This policy was introduced in 2015 with procedures following in 2016. The failure is not the absence of policy, it's the absence of enforcement, oversight and accountability. The Dunmurry Manor Independent Review of Adult Safeguarding in 2020 found that each health and social care trust was operating differently despite those agreed regional procedures. That finding mirrors exactly what families experienced at Muckamore Abbey Hospital. Evidence to this effect was given directly to the Muckamore Abbey Public Inquiry. Staff on the ground were using different forms, different processes, and working without consistent supervision. That level of inconsistency is not merely inefficient, it is dangerous. When procedures are not followed, investigations are not robust, timelines drift, meetings are missed, safeguarding plans are weak or absent, and vulnerable adults are left exposed during the very process that is there to protect them. As we sit here today, there is no effective oversight, monitoring or regulation of adult safeguarding investigations across Northern Ireland. Safeguarding investigations can take months or years to conclude, and during that time there is no assurance that procedures are being followed, no guarantees that required meetings are happening, and no independent body routinely checking the quality of the process. There is no organisation above the trusts that systematic checks whether adult safeguarding is being done properly. That's an extraordinary gap. The RQIA has an important role, but it does not oversee adult safeguarding investigations being carried out by trust safeguarding teams. It inspects environments and staffing, but it does not examine safeguarding files, audit timelines, or check compliance with procedures. If this bill is to succeed, it must include statutory oversight of the safeguarding process itself and not just the services where harm occurs. CCTV is important, but it is only one tool. It must be set within a system where incidents trigger proper safeguarding procedures. These procedures are followed consistently and investigations are externally overseen. Without that, CCTV risks becoming another unmanaged safeguard. Families have been talking about CCTV in care settings for well over a decade. It is time for action, but action that actually protects people. Culture is the single biggest problem in this system. We have listened to this committee for years discuss culture reviews, culture change, yet at no point during those reviews has anybody spoken to us, the families who have lived through the consequences of that culture. For over 10 years, families have sat in meetings with senior learning disability management, and what we have experienced in those rooms has been a disgrace. A culture that allows procedure to be ignored is a culture that tolerates risk. Culture does not change through reviews alone. It changes through enforcement, accountability, and consequences. We will now read a short quote from a public statement made by a Belfast Trust social worker, Geraldine O'Hagan, which is available on the Muckamore Abbey Hospital website. Quote, "This experience, so like other experiences I had with trying to advocate for families in Muckamore and getting nowhere, made me feel very disempowered. I thought, if I'm meeting all these obstacles as a senior social worker, how bad would it be for the family who were dealing with this on their own? I believe there are too many unnecessary obstacles for families in delivering services for people with learning disabilities within the system. In my experience, the main obstacles continue to be poor communication, poor investment in community services, and an imbalance of power between those who deliver care and those in receipt of care." End of quote. When safeguarding systems fail, families and advocates become the only protection vulnerable adults have. Independent advocacy must be properly trained, properly empowered, and genuinely independent. Advocates should never have to fight simply to ensure that basic safeguarding procedures are followed. Training without oversight is meaningless. Investigations without regulation are unsafe procedures. Procedures without enforcement are just paperwork. This bill must ensure mandatory training, standardised investigations, and external scrutiny of compliance. We are not here only for our loved ones. Behind us are families of children and young people with learning disabilities who are still in the children's system today. They are watching this process very closely because their children will soon transition into an adult social care system that's not fit for purpose. They should not be inheriting the same failures, the same culture, and the same risks that family before them have endured. If this bill does not address culture, enforcement, and oversight, then nothing fundamentally changes. And if nothing fundamentally changes, the next Health Committee will be sitting here in 5 or 10 years' time, hearing the same evidence, commissioning another review, and responding to another preventable failure. Chair and members, the Dunmurry Manor Review confirmed what families already knew. Adult safeguarding in Northern Ireland does not fail because policy does not exist. It fails because no one ensures it's followed. The bill is an opportunity to break that cycle. It's an opportunity to move beyond statements of regret and commitments to learn lessons. It is an opportunity to put enforcement, oversight and accountability at the centre of adult protection. If that opportunity is missed, families will continue to pay the price. Vulnerable adults will be exposed to harm, and this system will continue to fail the very people it is meant to protect. Please do not let this bill become another promise without protection. CCTV. Action for Muckamore supports the use in care settings as a safeguarding measure. We want to be clear that CCTV is not about punishment or surveillance for its own sake. It's about protection, transparency and accountability, particularly for people who cannot speak for themselves. However, it's also important to say that the drafting of legislation is not an area of our expertise. We do not pretend to know the correct legal wording or structure for CCTV provisions. That is a matter for legislators and legal drafters. We do not know. What we do know is this: CCTV in care settings has been talked about for a very long time. There have been reviews, consultations and discussions for years. At this point, it is time to make a decision. It's time to set up a properly resourced task force. It is time to agree a clear approach. It's time to work on a defined time frame. It is time to implement what is agreed upon. CCD cannot remain an idea that is endlessly discussed but never delivered. At Muckamore Abbey Hospital, CCTV was the catalyst that exposed large-scale abuse. The footage showed behaviour that should never happen in any care setting. But it's also important to say that CCTV was not needed to know that something was seriously wrong in Muckamore. The failings at Muckamore were visible long before the CCTV footage was viewed. They were evident in the culture, the staffing issues, the injuries, the complaints, and the repeated safeguarding concerns. Members of Action for Muckamore were raising concerns with the Department of Health, with the Health Minister, and with the regulator long before the CCTV footage came to light. The warnings were there. They did not act on the warnings. So while CCTV is an important safeguarding tool, it must be set within a wider system that listens to families, responds to concerns, follows procedures, and has proper oversight. CCTV should support adult safeguarding, not replace it. We have studied and discussed CCTV repeatedly, and Action for Muckamore believes that trying to deal with the nuances of CCTV inside the Adult Protection Bill is fundamentally the wrong approach. CCTV in care settings is not a simple clause that can be slotted into the wider adult safeguarding legislation. It's a major complex policy that requires its own dedicated legislation. The reasons are clear. CCTV involves multiple competing rights: the right to privacy, the right to family life, the right to dignity and autonomy, the right to protection and scrutiny. Balancing these rights require detailed regulation, consultation, case law review, and strong legal drafting. This cannot be achieved by a few paragraphs within a broader safeguarding bill. CCTV varies across different care environments: hospital wards, respite units, care homes, day centres, supported living, private bedrooms versus communal areas. Each setting has different risks, different layouts, and different legal considerations. One generic clause in the Adult Protection Bill cannot possibly cover all settings safely or lawfully. The operational standards for CCTV must be extremely detailed. Standalone legislation must address storage and retention periods, encryption and cybersecurity, who can view the footage auditing systems, triggers for mandatory reviews, rules for covert versus overt cameras, i.e. REBA, clarity on consent and capacity, safeguarding thresholds. These are not side issues, these are the core issues which will determine whether CCTV protects or creates new risks. The Northern Ireland Assembly should not attempt to deal with such a complex safeguard as a subclause. It deserves the same legislation quality and scrutiny given the major systems such as the mental capacity, social care and carers' rights. CCTV was a lifesaver in Muckamore, but it was completely mishandled. The catastrophic way CCTV was installed, stored and mismanaged at Muckamore demonstrates exactly why Northern Ireland needs detailed standalone legislation. The CCTV at Muckamore was not covert, it was overt. Nobody in the whole Northern Ireland Health Service had any clue what the status of the overt CCTV was, despite it being installed only for adult protection purposes in 2015. And I note there were signs all over that facility. You could hardly walk 10 feet without a sign saying you're under 24-hour surveillance. The CCTV installation and the CCTV management at Muckamore is a clear example of how not to do it. Look at the huge cost to the public purse and the huge cost to families because of the Muckamore CCTV fiasco. Footage was not monitored, timeframes were ignored, staff bullied anyone who questioned it, no audit system, no guidelines, no triggers for action. Governance collapsed. The Adult Protection Bill cannot correct these failings with a few brief clauses. Only a full dedicated CCTV and Care Settings Act can. The Adult Protection Bill is already overloaded. Adding complex CCTV regulation risks delaying or weakening the bill. Two separate bills mean stronger adult protection, stronger CCTV regulation, and more effective scrutiny. They complement each other. They should not be forced together. Chair, we strongly support CCTV, but we believe it is too important to be squeezed into a single clause in a wide-ranging bill. Northern Ireland needs separate, standalone legislation on CCTV and care settings because the issues involved are far too complex to be treated as an add-on. This bill should focus on oversight, enforcement and safeguarding standards, and CCTV should be given full legislation attention that it requires. England doesn't have a dedicated CCTV legislation for care settings, neither does Scotland or Wales. They all rely on patchy guidance, data protection rules and inconsistent practice. Northern Ireland now has a chance to lead. Action for Muckamore believes Northern Ireland can become the first jurisdiction in these islands to introduce standalone, world-leading CCTV legislation for care settings, legislation that is clear, safe, detailed and enforceable. We could be the first to get this right.
We're not finished. So, culture. When Action for Muckamore talks about culture, we're not talking about abstract values or mission statements. We're talking about how people behave when things go wrong, how concerns are received, and how families and staff are treated when safeguarding issues are raised. At Muckamore, the culture allowed abuse to happen, to continue, and to go unchallenged. But that culture did not exist only on the wards. It existed at management level and across the wider system. A healthy safeguarding culture is one where concerns are welcomed, not resisted. At Muckamore, concerns were treated as problems to be managed rather than warnings to be acted upon. Families who raised concerns were viewed as difficult. Staff who tried to do the right thing were isolated. That is not a safeguarding culture, that is a defensive culture. We want to be clear that the culture is not changed by writing new policy. Northern Ireland already has a safeguarding policy. What was missing was a culture that enforced them. Culture is revealed by actions, not words, At Muckamore, action showed that reputation was prioritised over safety, and control was prioritised over transparency. The evidence heard by the public inquiry shows that people who spoke up were not supported, some were marginalised, some were ignored, and some felt actively discouraged from raising further concerns. This is why Action for Muckamore believes that culture cannot be left to goodwill or leadership style. It must be shaped by law, oversight and consequences. If there are no consequences for ignoring safeguarding concerns, the culture will not change. If families can be excluded without challenge, the culture will not change. If investigations can be delayed for years without scrutiny, the culture will not change. The Adult Protection Bill must therefore do more than describe good practice. It must create conditions where the wrong culture cannot survive. That means independent oversight, mandatory procedures and accountability where those procedures are not followed. Culture also affects many members of Action for Muckamore as older carers who have experienced years of stress, fear and exhaustion because of how they were treated when they raised concerns. The way carers are treated is a direct reflection of an organisational culture. We want to be clear that Action for Muckamore is not asking for blame for the sake of blame. We're asking for a culture where safeguarding is taken seriously from the first concern, not after the harm has been proven. The Health Committee has heard many times that culture needs to change. What we are saying today is that culture will only change if it is reinforced by law, oversight and enforcement. The Adult Protection Bill is an opportunity to hardwire a safeguarding culture that protects people, listen to families and support staff who do the right thing. If culture is not addressed properly in this bill, the same behaviours will continue even under a new framework. Culture is not a side issue. It is central to whether the legislation succeeds or fails. Mr. Brown.
That leads us to independent advocacy. When Action for Muckamore talks about independent advocacy, we're talking about the presence of a voice that is separate from the health trust, separate from the care provider, and focused solely on the interests of the adult at risk and their family. Many of the people cared for at Muckamore could not speak for themselves. Some had limited communication, others had none. Some lacked capacity of understanding of many issues. Some were entirely dependent on others to raise concerns on their behalf. In those circumstances, independent advocacy is not optional, it is essential. At Muckamore, families were often the only advocates, yet they were excluded, marginalised or treated as a problem when they raised concerns. An advocate must be independent, not just in name, but in practice. Advocacy that sits within the same system being scrutinised is not independent. Independent advocates must be able to challenge decisions, question delays, escalate concerns without fear of retaliation or obstruction. Action for Muckamore believes that independent advocacy should not depend on whether a family knows how to navigate the system or has the strength to keep pushing on. Older carers in particular should not have to fight complex systems on their own while dealing with stress, ill health and exhaustion. Independent advocacy must be available early, not introduced after harm has occurred. Advocates should have access to information, meetings, documentation. Without access, advocacy just becomes symbolic rather than meaningful. At present, advocacy provision is inconsistent. Some people receive support, others do not, and families are often unclear about what advocacy exists or how to access it. The inconsistency leaves vulnerable adults exposed and places an unfair burden on the families. Action for Muckamore believes that advocacy must be embedded in the safeguarding process itself, not added on as an afterthought. Advocates should have a recognised role in adult safeguarding investigations, Mental Capacity Act processes and care planning decisions. Advocacy must also be properly resourced. An underfunded advocacy system cannot provide effective challenge. We also believe that advocates should be trained in learning disability, safeguarding and trauma-informed practice. Independent advocacy protects not just the adult at risk, but the integrity of the safeguarding system. Without independent advocacy, the system relies on families to be persistent, resilient and knowledgeable, which is neither fair nor safe. The Adult Protection Bill must therefore make independent advocacy a core component of safeguarding, not a discretionary extra. If advocacy is not guaranteed in law, the same patterns of exclusion and imbalance of power will continue. Independent advocacy is all about balance. It ensures the most vulnerable people are not left voiceless in systems that hold power over them.
And you'll be glad to know we're coming to the end. So, training, investigation and adherence to procedures. When Action for Muckamore talks about training and investigations, we're not talking about box ticking or compliance on paper. We're talking about whether safeguarding actually works in practice when concerns are raised. Northern Ireland has adult safeguarding policies and procedures. The problem has never been that they do not exist. The problem is that they are not followed consistently. Training without enforcement is meaningless. Staff can be trained, but if there is no consequences when procedures are ignored, behaviours does not change. At Muckamore, safeguarding procedures were in place, yet abuse continued. That tells us that training alone is not enough. Investigation must be timely, thorough, independent. Delays of months or years undermine safeguarding and cause significant harm to families and carers. Action for Muckamore has seen adult safeguarding investigations drift without clear timelines, without clear leadership and without effective scrutiny. When investigations are poorly managed, the focus shifts away from protection and accountability and towards process management and delay. Procedures exist to protect vulnerable adults, not to be selectively applied or adapted for convenience. One of the most serious failures in the system is the lack of oversight of investigation. There's no routine external check that procedures are being followed correctly. When procedures are not followed, there is often no consequences. That creates a system where poor practice can continue unchecked. Training, therefore, be tied to clear expectations and accountability. Staff need to know that safeguarding procedures are mandatory, not optional. Investigations must also be standardised. People should not receive different levels of protection depending on which trust area they live in. Action for Muckamore believes that investigations should be subject to independent monitoring, quality assurance and audit. Without oversight, even well-written procedures fail in practice. Families and advocates should know what the safeguarding process looks like, what stage it is at, and what should happen next. Lack of transparency in investigation increases stress and erodes trust. The Adult Protection Bill must ensure that training, investigation and procedures are embedded in law, not left to guidance. It must make clear who is responsible, what must happen and what happens when it does not. If procedures remain optional in practice, the same failures will continue under a new legislative framework. This bill is an opportunity to move from guidance to guarantees. Training, investigations and adherence to procedures are not technical details. They are the backbone of effective safeguarding. Thank you for listening.
Can I add something just for context in the lines of CCTV? Obviously, the Trust owns up to nothing. Nobody knew about Muckamore, nobody told me. We're all innocent. How were we to know? Never mind the hundreds of confirmed adult safeguarding investigations that were proven. So that should have been a massive red flag. But besides that, the Trust position will be, but things have moved on, lessons, wring the hands, look sad and say lessons have been learnt, reassure the public. Now, that's what I want to explain to you. I'm going to talk in the most broadest, vaguest terms, not to identify anybody. I have permission to speak on this person's behalf. Somebody moved into the facility several months ago, got resettled, and after a while this person could speak and told the parents, I'm being ill-treated. Parents went to the facility. This person, male or female, says they're being ill-treated. A lot of rubbish, went up the line, problem family. These staff are super, brilliant, totally unbelieved. So the family pushed and pushed and pushed and then said, tell you what, play the CCTV. If it shows all's in order, we'll walk away quite happily and contented. If it shows all's not in order, well then we expect action. It was agreed. Play the CCTV. Now Muckamore's story was, we never knew that the CCTV were there, switched on. This facility, play it. Oh, it's not switched on. So you've got a CCTV facility wasn't switched on. Well, I better go on as in from now. So the facility switched the CCTV on. Now bear in mind, that's only a few months ago. Complaints were still being made about ill treatment by the individual. The parents raised the concerns on this person's behalf. Now, I'm not going to say it's somewhere in Northern Ireland. I will be so vague so nobody can tie down who it is or where it was. Went and complained again, right up the top. Problem family, blah, 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 the usual. So again, play the cameras. Let us see what's happening. If there's nothing and it's untoward, we'll walk away. So they played the cameras. 12 people were dismissed and 1 prosecuted by the police. Now, 8 years after the Muckamore scandal, the same people are in safeguarding positions and the same attitude, it can't be happening. My staff are great. Don't believe them. This is rubbish. They're a problem family. And then when you play the footage, friggin' hell, what am I going to do now?
And by the way,
What
this
has been
was,
learnt?
sorry, Glynn, this was an ex-Muckamore patient who was resettled in the community and further abuse and neglect.
So the point we're trying to make...
We don't feel that from Muckamore
No.
To the community that any lessons have been learned. The safeguarding is not fit for purpose. Margaret Kelly, the ombudsperson, announced in 2023 publicly that it was not safe. This adult safeguarding is not fit for purpose.
Now, this also
Nothing's changed.
So I'm just going to stop there. I mean, that example you've given us just to end your evidence has been particularly harrowing, and it is very disconcerting to hear that, particularly given the experience of Muckamore and what we're here to discuss. So I just want to thank you first of all for giving that evidence. It was very forthright, but it's important to us that we hear it. I mean, your experience, this committee will certainly view as important with regard to the evidence that we're doing. This is a very important bill. It's vitally important that we get it right, and what we've heard today will be very useful to us in our continued deliberations to get it right. We're going to have questions here from members. So, I mean,
Let me just say this, one sentence. The whole point of that was, again, as in Muckamore, without the CCTV, you weren't believed.
Yeah.
So that'll be still going on.
Families were made out to be troublesome families.
Yeah.
Now that's only one case. Of course, we could go on and tell you lots of others, but that's just an example. So the point is, families are not believed when they raise concerns. Of course, families, the majority of them, I'm sure, are out to protect their loved ones. And why we come against this treatment and false allegations made against families, because we're seen as troublesome, is unacceptable. And sorry, my phone's ringing. I thought I turned it off. So sorry, go ahead.
You're absolutely. I mean,
Sorry.
you covered, both of you covered a number of issues: oversight, culture, independent advocacy, and CCTV were the four primary. So I am quite sure that the members will focus on those and give you ample opportunity to expand upon some of the stuff that you've said. So in terms of culture, because you talked quite a lot about culture, and I mean, you seem to be saying that culture can't change unless it's legislated for, reinforced by enforcement. So I mean, I'm kind of just going to ask you what you think needs to be included in the bill that isn't currently there. I mean, I know you're saying that some of the stuff that potentially could be in guidance needs to be shifted to legislation. Is that what it is, or is there more? Or are there specific things that you think need to be included in the drafting of this bill that aren't currently there that would help with your family's experience of culture within the trust?
So, for example, and this is only part of it, when we talk about culture, so I myself, back in 2015, 2016, was raising concerns about Muckamore and my daughter, and I felt that I wasn't listened to. It's almost as if there's a culture that, I don't know why, but people are raising concerns, and it's not taken, serious. And all those people that you reach out to who are there as part of the adult protection, just ignored. Then, as a mother, you're trying to protect your loved one, and you go back and you won't go away. And then you're accused of being a difficult family, or there could be false allegations made against you based on no proof whatsoever. That's the culture.
And do you think
there's a
Catherine,
power imbalance?
Do you think that strengthening of the independent advocacy would help in that scenario?
I definitely do. I believe that independent advocacy, which I cannot nearly say, for example, I could be given an advocate, and while yes, my own personal advocate is good, however, is she trained in all the policies and procedures? Can she, support me? She should know all the policies and procedures and be trained in them. So the stages in the adult process, APP1 to APP7, within those different steps and stages, she should know and be able to say to the trust, for example, or the DAPO, but Catherine needs to be involved in stage 4. You've now done your investigation at stage 3. Stage 4, the family should be involved and hear the findings of the adult safeguarding procedure.
And Glynn, you talked about the resource, when you're talking about advocacy, they had to be resourced properly. I mean, some of the evidence that we're potentially getting seems to potentially give us concern that resources may be a difficulty, even if we got legislation that was excellent, very good, perfect, that there is the worry in a constrained budget that there may not be the resources. I mean, that would, in your view, have a very detrimental impact.
Yes, that goes to the core of every problem government has. If you don't resource what you're trying to achieve, it'll become a farce. I mean, the police said, we were watching them online, that if you go piecemeal fashion to introduce something, I'll bring this bit in and bring that bit in, not properly resourced, it'll end up with shambles. Every department, the police, RQI, everybody's under financial cosh. RQI is meant to have an oversight of adult safeguarding, but they've told us they're not resourced to do that. So they may learn that your light switches are a bit dirty and change those, but the crucial issues, they're not resourced to check and enforce. And to me, that's a critical feeling.
And
They should have oversight from start to finish. If I'm going to inspect a facility, how many else safeguarding investigations have been proven in this facility? Do I need closer scrutiny here, or is this coming up smelling the roses? I think money's going to be at the core of everything we're trying to do here. And if it's not provided in adequate amounts, it'll end up a shambles.
And sorry, could I just jump back to the independent advocacy? As I say, they need to be fully trained in all the policies and procedures. They need to be confident in their job and not be afraid to challenge. There needs to be a healthy culture of not being afraid. For example, if they can have oversight and they can be part of the safeguarding, and if they believe and know that the procedures are not being adhered to, they shouldn't be afraid of any repercussions because they speak up. Where I have had, not this current, but in the past, advocates while in Muckamore who said to me, I have to be careful about what I challenge because after all, it's the Belfast Trust that are paying me. Yep. So there should be no fear in challenging. They should be fully qualified and trained and know and be confident in supporting people like myself or others.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
On CCTV, obviously, this committee has heard a raft of evidence to this point. Most people are sitting on the fence with regard to CCTV because they see it as a difficult thing to potentially get right. You've actually went a stage further in terms of your position, which I hopefully am getting right. You're saying that you agree that there should be CCTV, but because it's so difficult that it can't be dealt with properly within the context of this bill. I'm right in saying that?
Yes. It should be a standalone bill. We agree it should be put in the one paragraph to implement it, but the mechanisms, the structure, and everything surrounds it, one size doesn't suit all. For instance, my son has no speech whatsoever, so he can't tell me anything as in Muckamore, whereas somebody else could be able-bodied, lacking a lot of capacity, but still able to speak and discern things. So you can't implement a system that suits A, but is detrimental to Z. So it needs a lot more work. People beyond our capability, we're not legislators, we don't draft law, we don't know. Check with jurisdictions and all our places, what is good practice, what works, what doesn't work. Body-worn cameras, all this comes into it. What legislation are you using for that, So we're quite realistic about it. We're not a dream world, just snap your fingers is going to happen. This is hugely complex and it needs to be dealt with in a timely and a definitive manner.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm just going to go around. We have a set amount of time, so this is very emotive. I can completely understand that. If we just, in terms of members, try and be concise in questions and answers, we'll get around everybody. Dan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for your evidence. I think it is really important. Just to go back to the CCTV, I lamented last week that we'd heard a lot of evidence about CCTV, but actually nobody said what they wanted really, or nobody really would give us, this is my definite direction. So I think your evidence is very powerful and very important, because I think that you recognise the inherent difficulties of CCTV for the individual in terms of their privacy, because for the individual who lives in that establishment, that room is their home. And that's it could be a real invasion of privacy. It could, on the other hand, be a huge protection. So I'm struggling with it. So I really appreciate the fact that you have given, a very clear thing around this, and say that, a clause in a bill is not probably enough to do it. The clause actually says that that this would enable regulations to be made around, so it's an enabling, and it would enable regulations to be made. Would that be enough, or does it have to be absolutely separately scrutinised legislation?
I would prefer our group legislation.
Okay.
We have had loads of procedures. Nobody follows them. I was in RQIA and I was getting information from my son on an issue, and at the same time somebody phoned me from the trust and says, you're not entitled to the information that I wanted. Yeah. Now beside me was my advocate, who was well jammed up in procedures, and I can't remember the page. Turn to page 49, paragraph 6, and this manager, I quote that, this information must be shared with the parents. And I says, that's your policy. Now, this manager said to me, I never knew that.
Yeah,
now,
doesn't surprise me.
If she's a manager, she's enforcing her underlings, in theory, to comply with the policy. But she admitted she hadn't a clue. I went, my God, I mean, how many breaches of the system? Nobody, I can pull a bit out, I'm doing this, I'm not doing that, and there's no comeback. Who cares? We need somebody to say, right, there's a sample, there's been 500 this month, adult safeguarding. We'll pick a sample of 10, we'll start at phase 1, right the way through, see was it handled properly, is there learning we can give back to the trust, and are they willing to learn? That's another question.
Yes, I think that your point is very, very well made around culture. And there are any of us that advocate on behalf of our constituents or just people who write into us will understand that culture is a real inhibitor to progress and indeed, in your case, to safety of your loved ones. So I think the point that you make around culture is really, really important. So I'm going to make my note that regulation is not sufficient. Separately scrutinised legislation is where you think the CT, and if you have to wait a little bit longer, you're happy to do that.
Right.
We've got that right. Okay.
Well, to be honest, culture in any organisation will all tell you it's hard to change. No matter what your organisation is.
And it takes years to change, and really strong leadership to change it. I think that's important. The Adult Safeguarding Board, have you any views on it? Okay, I'm trying to find my note on it.
Sorry.
Our problem is, if you take Muckamore, there was RQIA, there was a Health and Social Care Board, there's the Belfast Trust, there's all these different stratas of governments and oversight. But none of them worked. So our worry is all these things are great on paper, but unless you've got an inquisitive mind, you start challenging, why is there so many people going into seclusion? Is there no better, less restrictive practice? How come there's so many adult safeguarding proven allegations? Does nobody go, my God, one of our facilities must be way off the rails? Nothing seems to trigger anybody to be curious about anything. So it's going to be how vigilant and how you need people that are driven for adult safeguarding, passionate to see a massive change. You just don't want to. It seems to be, I go from RQIA to a senior person post on the board, I go from a senior post on the board to RQIA, and all these positions are interchangeable.
Partial.
Yeah. So
and nobody actually takes responsibility and it takes the gauntlet and moves forward.
Can you legislate for safeguarding and for culture? Can you legislate for culture? Because that's what we have a piece of legislation which we have to try to improve. Well, and I'm really, I agree with you. I've done a lot of work on the cervical cancer issue, and nobody looked back over the records there either. Nobody had a curious mind, as you talk about. You know, it was, and nobody did the investigation until a new guy came in, and bang, he said, something not right here.
You know, there's themes and there's patterns that emerge, which did happen in Muckamore. There was red flags, there was warning signs, there was a lot of failed and missed opportunities. Now, I'm only an ordinary person, but I could identify and feel in my gut that something was radically wrong. But all the professionals couldn't pick up on it. I don't believe that for one moment, never will believe it. That's the problem. It's about identifying, recognising it in the early days. It's about listening to people that come forward and raise concerns and, be open to the reality that just because you're a nurse a manager or whatever in the profession doesn't mean to say that it's possible that they could be doing harm. But there seems to be always protect ourselves, protect the NHS. That culture needs to go. They need to be open, honest and transparent, and that's part of the culture.
Thank you very much for that. I think that is very, very powerful.
Thank you.
And you've experienced it, and I think that's very powerful.
I call it the musical chairs of mayhem. If you look at all these scandals, and bear in mind this is a fifth major inquiry into the health service, I mean that there alone should tell you something tragic is wrong. But it's, if you actually look, person A is in this position in this scandal, who then moves to a more senior position in that scandal, who then becomes quite senior in this scandal, and all they do is leave wreckage in their wake. In any other job, when you preside over disaster, you get the bullet. And that's a big problem with Muckamore again, like all inquiries. It's a civil service, nobody's to blame, nobody knew nothing, nobody's going to get sacked, not a hope in hell. And there must be accountability within the system. People must learn that if you do, we're not talking about somebody making a genuine mistake. All do that. We're talking about catastrophic failure. And everybody just walks away and goes, well, it's not my problem, I knew nothing. Yeah.
I think that most members of the committee here would agree, and I wouldn't pretend to speak for everybody, but accountability is one of the biggest issues
100%.
that we find in health service.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the separate CCTV legislation, I mean, obviously, depending on the final version of this bill, we have the ability for secondary legislation, which will complement the first one, and it also carries out with full committee scrutiny and public consultation. So, I mean, that's a potential avenue in terms of additionality with regard to the CCTV aspect. Is that something that...
And we would welcome that we are invited back to speak about that, and if we can help in any way with through our experiences.
But I would also add, again, this process, two plebs at the bottom of the pile
Not plebs, a very important
are being asked to make changes. Where's the senior management? Where's your constructive proposals to protect the... What's your view on CCTV? Let's see you drive something forward. Let's see you do something right for a change. It shouldn't be up to the parents, as usual, to expose the scandal, to expose the cover-up, to expose the suppression of information. It's on us for everything. Fight for public inquiry. You know, even senior people had to be ordered to do their job. I'm going to watch 25% of the footage in the worst scandal in UK history. No, you're going to watch 100% of the footage. I moved to get people that watched the alleged abuse in our ward. No, you're going to suspend them. You had to be ordered to do your job. Now, the boss sets the tone for the organisation, and if that's your response, that says it all to me.
Okay, and I should say...
Sorry, there's one more thing I'd like to say in relation to what Glynn's saying. So, for example, in Muckamore, it was a joint protocol. Yeah, the police and the Belfast Trust. I don't believe that the Belfast Trust should have been investigating themselves. It was not independent, and as we know, within the first 2 years, it was totally incompetent, and that in itself was horrendous. So I believe that's also something that should be looked at, that there should be an independent body, and that they are not allowed to investigate themselves, because there's a conflict of interest, and of course they will try to protect themselves, and that's exactly what happened. And the truth about Muckamore still has not been revealed because of the ongoing legal system and whatever. But definitely they should not be allowed, nobody should be allowed to be part of investigating themselves.
Annie?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on something Dan was saying, and we heard it around the room, and you described yourself as two plebs. Not at all. Your personal lived experience in this area makes your views and your evidence and your opinions in this invaluable to us. You know, this is informing how we view this legislation going forward, and it is absolutely priceless. And your evidence, your presentation today was, you know, very, very detailed, very comprehensive, and thank you very much for that. You know, it will form how this is shaped as it goes forward. That's you'd given us some very, very strong opinions on CCTV there. I had a couple of questions in and around CCTV. You've kind of answered them already for us. So we know that CCTV has already played, a massive role in exposing the abuses, and you've come out very, very strongly in favour. Certainly, I've had differing views from families of people with complex needs and concerns that they wouldn't be safe without CCTV, and also people who are disabled who would see that as an invasion of privacy, and there is that competing battle of rights as it were there, and I think you alluded to that as well. How would you see that being balanced? Is it the detailed framework of legislation that is needed there?
To be honest, it's so complex and it's so presumptuous for us to say we believe CCTV there. Maybe it's a small facility with 6 people. You might find 3 of them are totally non-verbal and would benefit from that. Others may be a limited capacity and their parents may be naive or whatever. I mean, people confide to me with a scandal. And people want, thank God, it's terrible it happened to you, but thank God it never happened to my child. And then 4 weeks later, there's the news. What? So people's perception changes once they're behind the 8 ball. So you mightn't be keen on CCTV now, but if there's a safeguarding challenge down the road with your loved one, and you're trying to get access, see, that's another thing. Some of the facilities, the parents are not allowed to view the footage. So if you've got a safeguard concern, I've checked that, it's all okay, and you have to accept that official's view. So you need access to the footage yourself with an independent advocate. You need access to documentation. I mean, I'm 8 years down the road, I'm still fighting a trust for access to documentation on my son. I FOI now. See, that I was told at the very start by Sean Holland, a parent shouldn't be using FOI to access information that should be printed over the counter by the trust. We're open and transparent. I want to choke someone when I hear that, because every time you use that phrase, then they do the exact opposite. Now, I'm 8 years down the road, still trying to access information on my child. And now, here's the hunter saying, your son's no capacity, so we can't now give you that information you're requiring, because we don't know if he would really want that. And I think, well, you've been giving me information for 8 years, but the minute I ask for the 350 adult safeguarding or the adverse incidents that are outside Operation Turnstone, now there's all these obstacles putting up. So I'm being honest, I would tell the public, do not believe them. They're not open and transparent, and they will frustrate you at every corner. It needs to be wrote in that parents have access to all relevant documentation for their loved ones' safety. There's so many things wrong with this country, to be honest, on adult safeguarding.
And your example that you gave there that was highly concerning, and a very recent example, if you said 3 months ago.
I didn't say 3 months ago. What happened a few months ago? I'm trying to be vague so nobody can start beavering to see.
So sorry, Glynn, that's what I...
That person is safe now, by the way, in an environment where they are safe and they are free from abuse. So that's...
So there is CCTV in some facilities, and as I say, it has proved very beneficial. So, while we understand that it can't be mandatory because there's too many nuance around it. However, we must, in my opinion, look at the most vulnerable, non-verbal, maybe no capacity, and it may well be that it's on an individual basis, and it may come down to choice. But I don't think anybody would disagree that it is effective, CCTV. It also can be used for positives. For example, PBS, positive behavioural support, does you understand that? No? Right. So, well, I'm not going to start giving you the lesson at the moment. But for example, if there was CCTV, there's an incident, the PPS practitioner maybe could view that, look at the behaviour of the staff. We're not talking about negative here, but and learn from that, from observation. Well, maybe you could have approached the service user or spoke to them in a different way. that then would, eliminate the trigger. And so it could be used for other reasons as opposed to safeguarding, in my opinion.
One other thing I'd like to draw your attention on that issue of CCTV. If you watched Winterbourne View, and then it was followed by Worldton Hall. Now, in that facility, it was being bought over by a different provider, and there was covert cameras used by the panorama team. And what the scary thing there was the abusers would call it clothesline, and as a patient went by, they'd put out their fist, catch him in the throat and drop down. But they were saying amongst themselves, being recorded, a new provider is talking about installing CCTV in this facility because of the allegations. And some of the abusers, and this is chilling, doesn't matter, will not abuse him anymore in the communal areas or the hall, will do it in their bedroom or the toilet where there's no cameras. Now that shows the mentality of an abuser.
That's part of the issue that has been raised with us, that people will find areas that aren't covered by CCTV and use that, and as you say, the mentality of the abuser is horrific, and I remember those images, and it absolutely is.
Exactly, but then if we go back to what we previously said, the oversight, the scrutiny, the governance, the monitoring, which we believe should come from the RQIA, early detection, warning signs, as was in Muckamore, to prevent as opposed to dealing with it when it happens. All of those mechanisms, if they're more robust, and as I say, they're monitored and audited on a regular basis, can be tools to pick up warning signs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then CCTV will only be one tool in the bag of safeguarding. Yeah.
Absolutely appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Linda?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both of you for your presentations. And I just want to reference one thing. I think you're far from plebs. I think that your presentations have been articulate, easily understood, and really, really important to what we're doing and what we're scrutinising at this moment in time, because at the end of the day, you are the people who have experienced it, you are the lived experience, and therefore you are the most honest voices in this whole process, because you're saying this is what we lived through, this is what we experienced. You have skin in the game, but your skin in the game is to protect people, and that's what this legislation's about. It's not about, protecting any organisation or individuals who have done or may potentially do harm. I think your point around culture is really important. And I know Deanne asked, can you legislate for culture? Duty of candor.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
the only legislation
Individual,
for culture.
statutory, yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
accountability, duty of candor, and
Absolutely.
individual duty of candor would be a great deterrent.
And it allows for some of the stuff that you talked about, both of you talked about, but particularly yourself, around that issue of protecting staff who are afraid to speak up. Because the duty of candor actually encourages and protects, and I know it's not in this legislation, but I'm just making the point, and I think it is important. And we have asked other people what their view is, and I think your view, you've just made it very, very clear. Just in terms of the CCTV, and yes, that would mean, separate legislation would mean it taking more time. I think probably to say that it would be a little more time is not, I wouldn't confidently tell you it would be a little more time, right? I'm just being honest with you, because I've seen what the legislative process can be in terms of us waiting for legislation coming from departments, and the Bill's office being under extreme pressure as well. However, if you think that is the best way to do it, then that is something we absolutely need to look at and consider. And I'm just wondering, Chair, maybe in light of what has been said, could we look at the legislation that has been used, and how I'm speaking as a member of the policing board as well as a member of the health committee. So obviously, police officers use body worn video, and that has been a process in itself. You know, that it was optional whether you wanted to turn it on or not. And more often than not, when things went wrong, the body worn video was not turned on. And that has changed, but culture has had to change for that to change. But in making it mandatory, that changed the culture as well. So I think you're right about, you know, that there need to be rules put in place in order to change the culture. It won't change of its own accord. It's just not realistic. It's not what happens. We see it. And I think that accountability and scrutiny piece is really important. So Chair, maybe if we can get some information around the body worn video. I mean, nurses are now wearing them in
Anne-Marie Hospital. There's a pilot scheme currently. Yeah. So that might form some.
So it's how we can,
basis.
because that doesn't involve necessarily having CCTV watching every move that, you know, that the service user makes, but it does watch every interaction with staff members, and maybe that gives a level of protection. I don't know. I think it's something that would have to. I'm throwing it out there but something we need to look at, or we need to ask the departmental officials.
Well, just to
And
cut
the
that
other thing,
conversation,
just
we'll visit to Anne-Marie Hospital next week, specifically looking at the body worn cameras, CCTV,
and how successful
the operation of it. So that conversation we will be having next week with those who are operating it currently in Antrim.
So we can ask those questions. I think that's a good opportunity.
Well, sorry, clearly, I presume the staff, this pilot scheme was brought about because staff needed to be protected. You know, substantiation of incidents that may happen. That's no different from what we feel. We want our loved ones protected as well. And we are strongly advocating for CCTV. And I think currently this bill, how many years to take this bill to sort of...
4 they're claiming to draft it.
Yeah, probably much longer. My only concern is that while we realise that CCTV can't be mandatory, it doesn't fit all situations. But at the same time, I would be concerned that how long more will we wait for an individual an individual legislation around CCTV, because I strongly believe that it is a good tool in deterring and protecting vulnerable people.
Yeah,
So,
and I mean, it also, I think the point needs to be made that it also does protect staff.
Yes,
Nobody
exactly.
nobody should be afraid of having that kind of oversight if they know that they're doing the right thing. And I made this point as well around police officers whenever they were wearing body worn video. It protected them from false accusation, or
Yes.
from also was able to show the full series of events. So
If
I
you've
do think-
nothing to fear, if you've nothing to hide, you've nothing to fear. That would be my motto. And if everything's open, honest and transparent, well then why not? And as I say, we walk down our streets and there's CCTV, and I do get the nuance around privacy and confidentiality and all that. But unfortunately, the mere fact we're discussing CCTV says it all, because of the failures in protecting the most vulnerable within our society. The largest adult safeguarding ever in the history of the NHS, Muckamore Abbey Hospital. So otherwise we wouldn't be discussing it. And only for Glynn Brown pressing forward and uncovering the CCTV, the abuse at Muckamore may well still be continuing. So that's the reality of the truth. So it does need to be used as a part of a safeguarding. It's just there's too many nuance around it to have it mandatory. Yep.
Also, I'd like to say, just to refresh your memory, a previous health minister, Edwin Poots, after the Winterbourne scandal, wrote to all the heads of trusts,
2014.
You're going to have to reassure me that this catastrophe can't happen on our watch.
Rob's close.
So everybody was writing back, we're on the ball, we're aware of this, we're on top of it, don't you worry, things are sweet. And then you get a litany. I mean, Muckamore is only the end result of all these failures. So everybody's always talking, and then we'll wring the hands. Oh, it's another scandal. Oh, we didn't know.
Yeah, you know,
Why it's important to get this bill. But two more speakers. Our next
All right.
presentation are there, so I want to allow the next two members to get their questions. And
Thank you,
sorry,
Chair.
we've now
Thank you.
three members, so that we get moving on to. Okay, so Nuala.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Catherine and Glynn. Sorry I can't be there in person today, just a bit under the weather. I hope Aaron and Alicia are doing well themselves, and just want to thank you for the fight that you've been putting up for the past few years. It's been a long time coming, this bill, and I notice that the Sharps are in the background too. So I hope so all is well with Laura. Thank you all for coming here today. I just have a few questions. I understand your concerns of putting CCTV into the bill in a generic clause. And I hope you can get the sense from the committee is that is not something that we would seek to do, and that the department, you know, putting it in a clause that it then have secondary legislation. We've heard from different organisations as to why it would be better on the face of a bill versus a secondary legislation, and one of those is around accountability and to be able to scrutinise it, like you both have just mentioned, to be able to come back. However, my concern is if we don't deal with CCTV in any shape or form in this bill now, is that it'll still be 5+ years down the line in which we would. So it's about trying to balance the best way forward here. And just want to seek what your view in is with regards to moving forward to have the option open for CCTV on this bill, not mandatory, because you're right, it is nuanced, but having the option open, or is your preference that it's just not dealt with at all in this bill?
No, we would prefer it to be in the bill.
yeah.
And bolster it with secondary legislation as and when they're able to draft it in a professional manner.
Yeah, because we have some facilities.
Okay, that's helpful
Sorry.
for us.
Sorry. No, because we do have some facilities with CCTV, so therefore that would have to be monitored appropriately currently. So yes, I agree, or we agree that it needs to be included in this legislation, but it needs to be
Beefed up.
a standalone. Yeah.
Clause or something in it. Yes, I think it's definitely given the committee a lot of scope for how we deliberate on this issue moving forward. My other question then is around the independence. We've heard from of the adult safeguarding, you know, the independent board that they're setting up, and the independent advocate for the person, the adult involved. And I listened to your submissions, but in terms of the advocate, you're fine and content and feel that that's as strengthened as it need to be with regards for the individual themselves, that, you know, if it was your child, that the independent advocate is the way forward.
It's the way forward if they're appropriately trained. My experience of the system, you didn't know who was an advocate. When you found one, you used that one just as an independent witness. They weren't conversant with the procedures, where I found along the way someone who was an expert in the procedures, and that's when things started to change.
Yeah.
When I started to get information, because it was targeted in the right direction, asking the right things. But there's no sense giving me somebody as an advocate to hold. I don't want somebody to hold my hand. I want somebody to be an expert in their policies and procedures and give me guidance that can help me protect my loved one.
Yeah.
I don't want somebody to hold my hand. And that's what's going to be crucial. Those that are doing the job need to be proficient, and they need to be confident that no matter what fur flies as a result of pushing back against the system, asking the wrong people, highlighting their failures, that they feel confident that their organisation will get on with it.
Yeah.
We have one
being
saying to us
afraid,
that, you know, we have advocates saying to us, you'd be subtly reminded, remember, we pay for your organisation, which to me is a subtle pull your horns in.
They also could be an essential part of the safeguarding and ensuring if they're educated themselves to the policies and procedures within the trust, then they, should not be afraid to challenge or not be afraid of repercussions for challenging. Otherwise, what is the point of giving you an advocate unless they can truly support you?
Yeah.
And support us
Yes,
to
I
protect our
agree.
loved ones.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement and think that's helpful. And I have another question and you might need a moment just to think, so don't really need to rush. What do you think works well now for yourselves as adults, parents of, your children who have complex needs when it comes to adult safeguarding? Is there anything that you can say that does work well now and you don't want it to change? Whether it is, maybe it's family liaison or any other issues associated with their care. Is there anything that you think does work well and you don't want it to change, and you don't want the bill to have those kind of changes without thinking about it?
A big part of your child's behaviour will be the environment. So if you're in, we'll say, Muckamore, and there's chaos and there's alarms going and response teams coming in, force being used, you being trailed off to seclusion, mayhem around you, just the nature of the various patients, that is bound to reflect in your behaviour. So if you then move to a quieter setting, there's no smashing glass, there's no response teams coming in to manhandle you, and you're being treated in a civil manner, all these things will affect your behaviour. So the placement where you go to, the staff surrounding you, the manager who oversees risk assessments, the behaviour staff, their competence, rate reports, all those things. I mean, I give you a simple example. In Muckamore, in a 3-month period, my son was mopped 48, 50 times, dosed up with the heavy drugs, don't know how many times, and threw in seclusion about 48 times. That was recorded. He then moved to a facility in a certain place, and over 6 years, he's only had hands-on about 5 times. And they went, right, that lasted 13 seconds, that was 24 seconds. And I went, you don't have a consultant psychiatrist, a registrar, a cabinet full of heavy drugs, you don't have a response team. There could be 3 girls looking after him. And they've only went hands-on 5 times in 6 years. And up there, he was getting hands-on every day of the week, through the seclusion operating centre. So you got to say to me, and these girls are not learning disability nurses. So the environment you're placed in and how you're treated will have a good reflection on how you behave. So that is something that's been done right. But the adult protection part...
Unfortunately, while I'm not saying that some things haven't been positive, but in my experience, environment is very important. So, for example, families may advocate for supported living. They may be assessed as supported living. If they're put in the wrong environment, they will not progress, they will regress. They could be financially inhibited. Their quality of life will be impeded. And it's so important, this is for families to be listened to in these situations, and also just because supported living isn't available doesn't mean to say that it's acceptable to put someone into a care home when some people that are quite capable are put in the wrong environment, and it'll never be right unless the environment's right. So, I can look at what the failures and I can see what would work better. But in my situation, I don't believe anybody's really listening to my opinion.
And that's where the individual dutyist calendar will be important. That all these people that obstruct you will have to comply and tell the truth, provide documentation. And if you treat people properly and give them access to information, you may be able to assuage their fears on a range of issues.
I mean, I think as families, what we want is people to work along with us, you know, to help us, because all we're interested in is the well-being and best interest of our loved one. But unfortunately, a lot of my experience and other people that I speak to, that isn't the experience. It's almost as if they do the opposite. And again, that comes back to the culture, and it's very frustrating. And, you know, then when you challenge them on the fact they're not adhering to the policies and procedures, there's a backlash from them, and that is the truth. That is the truth, and many, many families have experienced that, and that culture needs to stop. And when they're held accountable for not adhering to their own policies and procedures, maybe then things might start to change.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Nola. Moving on now to Alan.
Thanks very much. Look, abusing vulnerable people it's cowardly, it's inhuman, and I would describe the people carrying out as just inadequate bullies, and it's a heinous crime. Now, if someone was brought before a judge for slapping somebody in the face out in the street, they'll get a heavy fine. If it's really bad injury incurred, they might get a suspended sentence. But if somebody from Muckamore that was caught on CCTV, just one offence, slapping somebody on the face, and it was the same judge, you can't really do very much more than impose the same sentence as to somebody that slapped somebody in the street. And yet the two things are so different. Could you see a case for a parallel change in justice legislation that would create an offence of this sort of behaviour in a care setting, a catch-all, and it wouldn't even have to, you know, be specific about, you know, just a catch-all. You have abused somebody in whatever way, and that there should be a more hefty sort of sentencing available to judges to cope with that. Because as Johnny says, these people will find a corner, a blind spot, where they'll carry out their psychopathic actions. But the way you defeat that is by having deterrence. And if there was a specific sentence for abuse of people, vulnerable people, in a care setting, you might think twice before you lift your hands to one of the patients in those settings. So do you feel that maybe there is a case for heftier sentencing as a deterrent to try and stop this happening and to try and change this culture?
Would they argue that the 1986 mental health order allows for ill treatment from a cleaner right up to a director? I mean, I would be on for it, but I'm just real devil's advocate. A judge will take into consideration mitigating factors in your individual case, and he'll take into consideration aggravating factors. So an aggravating factor would be that adult that you assaulted had no capacity, was minding his own business, and that was a gratuitous assault. That would be a aggravating factor. So I would be all on for, yes, separate legislation, more robust sentencing. I mean, the public at large generally scratch their heads when you see somebody up for serious crime on a number of fronts, and you go, is that what he got? He knocked £300,000 and he's got suspended sentence.
Community service.
Community service. You know, again, I don't know the ins and outs of cases, but that would be definitely on the wish list if somebody would draft legislation and make a robust sentence for obviously the serious abusers.
I think, sorry, what you're saying is that someone that has been put in a position of care, they have a duty of care.
It's a breach of trust.
It's a breach of trust, but also they are trained and should be qualified in raising concerns, protecting, and they then become the perpetrator because they're in a position of trust. It's not like Joe Bloggs out in the street that hit me a slap on the face. That's the difference that you're trying to make. So hence, yes, I would agree. If you're entrusted with within the care sector to keep someone safe and you have a duty of care, well then the sentence should be stiffer.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Alan Robinson.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be very brief. I'm conscious of that we've well run over time. Look, I have no shame in saying that I have found some of the previous sessions by some quite complex and quite technical, but I have to say today, as others have said, I thought this was an incredibly powerful presentation, and probably one of the best sessions that we've had to date in refining this bill. And if there were, and I don't know if there are opportunities within the Adult Protection Board going forward for lived experience, I don't think there are two better people here that could sit on that board, or there are two better people who could be independent advocates with that suitable training. You have been exceptional today in allowing me even to better understand some of the issues that I have found very complex and detailed and technical. And you focused very heavily today on the independence and highlighted similar concerns that we all express in here of trusts marking their own homework and the department marking their own homework. But as note in your response, you have called for to be built in to the bill that there would be a review of the operation within a 3-year period and fixed intervals thereafter. I suppose, given that you'd focused heavily on independence today, how independent then would those reviews be?
Exactly.
Well, it's like everything, it's who you pick. It's like any public inquiry. Whoever you pick to run that inquiry will dictate the format, the scope, the terms of reference. So whoever's being picked to do the reviews, what are they totally independent? See, what makes us very suspicious is people float in senior positions between these organisations. You're in charge of this trust, you're getting ripped to bits, then you jump over and take a senior position in RQIA, a poacher turned gamekeeper, and you're going, how is that allowed to happen?
And you could be a chair of a
so
panel.
your employment rights, fair enough, we get all that, but it doesn't look good. And what's the pillow talk? You were mates with all these senior officials, and now you're meant to be enforcing action against them. It does make you wonder.
So therefore the question would be, how independent are they? And how can we have an independent, totally independent, that there's someone above that scrutinises, monitors?
Nobody from the trust. I think it should be an outsider.
Yeah.
Somebody from the mainland with a solid proven record.
Or down south.
Or down south, wherever. Somebody with the competence and the independence where everybody will look at him and say, that boy's achieved a lot in his own sphere. He'll be good.
And they're not afraid to challenge.
Yeah.
That they're not afraid to ask questions.
But you can't, from the old boys club here, you can't have somebody from the trust then overseeing the board to see how they're independent. Nah.
Your input today has been invaluable, and we very much thank you for that.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, Catherine, Glynn, that has been really useful to all of us. As I say, we have had a number of sessions. We'll have a number to follow this. We'll, I'm sure, use some of what we've heard today in our conversations with the department. We want to get this bill right. So there's a lot of competing evidence that we're hearing. We'll have to work our way through all of that. But certainly from what we've heard today, you've definitely given us much food for thought, and we really, really appreciate you coming and passionately putting forward the case.
We are willing to come back and help in any way, because ultimately, the truth be told, when myself and Glynn met, we had the same thought. We need to do something so that this can never happen again.
Absolutely.
What happened to our loved ones and others cannot happen again. And we and us, we do have the power if we have the drive forward to get it right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you very much.
All the best. Santa Maria. I'm glad that's over. not in camera anymore. am I? What? I don't believe you. Right, thank you very much.
Okay, see you later. Okay, members, item number 7 in our agenda is an oral briefing from the department on hospital car parking. So can I refer, I'm just moving on here. Okay, we'll just move on. So refer members to tab 6 from page 39. And can I welcome Mr. Paul Montgomery, Infrastructure Investment Director in the department, Miss Anne-Marie Smyth, Head of Management Service Unit within the department, Mr. Jeff Thompson, Assistant Director, Facilities and Support Service within the South Eastern Trust, Miss Olga O'Neill, Executive Director within Nursing Midwifery and User Experience in the Belfast Trust, and Miss Clare McMahon, Co-Director of Patient Client Support Services within the Belfast Trust. So these are all very welcome. We have got some presentations, so I'm just going to hand over to yourselves for some brief introductory remarks, and then we'll take questions. So,
thank you. The overall objective of the Department of Health hospital car parking policy is to ensure that there is a reasonable supply of car parking spaces available for patients, visitors and staff within the legislative, financial and operational constraints. While the department sets the overall policy, it is the Health and Social Care Trust who are responsible for operational delivery on a day-to-day basis, which is why Olga, Clare are here from the Belfast Trust, as well as Jeff from the South Eastern Trust. Colleagues working in the Trust have a very difficult job in balancing the competing demands for hospital car parking in challenging circumstances, and I would like to put on record the department's appreciation for their work and effort. There are just under 20,000 car parking spaces available across the Health and Social Care Trusts in Northern Ireland on 16 sites. Although there are no significant supply constraints on many of these sites, there are long-standing issues with those located in dense urban areas. The nature of these sites means that there's largely a fixed area of land available. This implies that more land for car parks means less land for clinical facilities, and more car parking spaces for staff means less for visitors and patients. Committee members will be aware from their own experience of the assembly car park of what happens when demand exceeds supply. Therefore, I hope you will appreciate that managing hospital car parks requires a delicate balance to be maintained between competing priorities, with trade-offs often necessary. In this context, the committee will be aware that the Hospital Parking Charges Act 2022 prohibits the imposition of charges for parking vehicles in hospital car parks. The Act was originally due to come into operation in May 2024, but this was delayed by 2 years and is now due to come into operation in May this year. Over the past 2 years, the Trust have been working to implement the legislative requirements of the Act with updates provided to the Committee every 8 weeks. In particular, a new traffic management system based on automatic number plate recognition remains on track to be operational by May 2026. This is required to control parking, preserve blue light routes and protect designated spaces in the absence of charging. Once parking is made free, there is expected to be an increase in demand with the scale uncertain. This will place increased pressure on the ability of the Trust to maintain safe access to their sites. To reduce the risk and to ensure the effective turnover of car parking spaces, a maximum automatic stay period of 3.5 hours will be applied regionally. This time period is based on data captured by the ANPR cameras during the testing phase and will ensure that up to 80% of vehicles will be able to drive in and out of the ANPR controlled parking areas without the need to be registered. However, vehicle owners will be able to extend their initial stay beyond the 3.5 hour period should they have a valid reason to do so. In terms of staff, there is insufficient capacity on some hospital sites for all staff to be provided with a car parking permit. Regionally, there are approximately 6,000 car parking spaces designated for staff and 12,000 staff who have a parking permit, as spaces can be shared by part-time staff, hybrid workers and staff working on shift patterns. Currently, some staff use patient and visitor spaces, with the numbers expected to increase following the abolition of charging, further increasing the pressure on spaces. In response, staff will no longer be able to access patient and visitor spaces once charges are abolished. However, at least some of these staff will be expected to have a greater need than those currently holding permits. To ensure that those staff with the greatest need are provided with a parking permit, the Department has requested that Trust implement an assessment of need for designated staff car parking space permits. The assessment criteria are to take into consideration individual circumstances, operational requirements, and the individual's ability to access alternative and sustainable forms of transport. In terms of managing the supply and demand of spaces available for staff, the new traffic management system will provide data and management reports on car park usage. This will enable Trust to make evidence-based decisions to improve efficiency in the use of car parks and potentially increase the number of spaces available for staff. In addition, the Trust have a range of supports in place to help encourage a reduction in the demand for on-site staff car parking. These include free off-site staff car parking with free shuttle bus, as well as electric car pools, cycle to work and car share schemes. Hopefully this provides the committee with a quick summary of the key issues in hospital car parking at the current time, but we'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So, I mean, this is supposed to come into effect in May, or how are we on course for that to happen?
Okay, well, all the operational, yes, no problem.
Okay.
Well, we're working towards that. Sorry, when I say no problem, I say it very easily. I'm sure there's lots of problems for Jeff and Clare, but
we're working towards
we are in plan to be operational.
Okay, thank you. And I mean, just from what you've said and what I've read in terms of your presentation, so there are aspects of this which are universal across the north. So the 3.5 hour is the time frame, but given specific issues in specific locations, particularly with regard to staff, there is going to be different criteria in terms of staff, and there's an assessment of needs which will be applied. So how is that working? Has there been engagement with trade unions in terms of that? How is that going?
Well, it's all supposed to be, all the assessment, one of the requirements is that everything is based on engagement with trade unions so that we take account of staff. But if Clare wants to discuss the Belfast position.
Would you like me just to give you a bit of an overview, particularly in relation to the Royal site, which you know is a particular area of interest? In relation to how we take these proposals through the Trust, we have a car parking strategy group in place. It's been in place for many years within the Trust, and that has representation from service groups and trade union colleagues on that group. So any proposals go through that group in terms of any changes, including the permit process. It is a very difficult process at the Royal site, and there's a lot of uncertainty at the minute around the permit process. So I'll just give you a bit of a summary as to where we've arrived. Back in 2022, we implemented a criteria-based assessment at the Belfast City Hospital site, and that was successfully implemented, and that's been in place and running for a number of years. And from 2022 until now, we have sought to put in place a criteria-based assessment on the Royal site. However, we have found that very challenging, and we've encountered many difficulties with that. In the first instance, we took the same criteria that we employed through the Belfast City Hospital process and used that for the Royal site. However, the feedback was that process was paused because of a number of issues, and the feedback from staff was very much that process that worked in the city did not work in the Royal in terms of the people who really needed to gain permits, getting those permits. Therefore, we went into a process of engagement with staff and getting feedback around the criteria, and that involved seeking staff engagement and people to take part in a process where they would rank criteria for us in terms of priority. We then took that information we got from 145 staff who took part and went forward with a priority-based criteria assessment. And that's very, very difficult because through our application process, we know that over 4,000 staff would wish to drive their car and bring it to the Royal site and park on site. And we are never going to have a solution that would meet everyone's needs. It would be less than half of that available. So it's a very difficult and challenging process. So we implemented the second phase of our application process after we'd paused it and done the engagement. However, we sent out outcomes in November 2025, and the process was paused again because there were a number of issues raised around that. So at this point, it remains paused. It was planned to be implemented in February. So from the 1st of February, people who had gained permits would change over. However, at this stage, we're analysing the safety concerns and issues that were raised through the Chief Exec and Exec team in relation to what they are before any next steps are agreed. So that's where we are with the Royal site. Our plan is then to go to the Matter site next after that.
So at this stage in January, neither have been worked out, and we're going live in May. So what in terms of speeding up that process, is that the plan to ensure that these difficulties are potentially resolved or hopefully resolved in advance of May?
Well, we're seeking to analyse the information in terms of the concerns raised, and that has happened before through this process, so we have experience of doing that. And we have crafted this particular process taking on all the feedback and the issues that were raised out of the previous process. But unfortunately, I can't give you an answer today as to when this potentially would be resolved, other than to say that it's certainly being considered in terms of the issues that have been raised.
Okay, well, I mean, certainly from my point of view, we wish to see it resolved and satisfactorily in conjunction with staff, so that it's resolved satisfactorily. I mean, so there's that issue of the staff, but then there's also, particularly again in Belfast, given that two of the hospitals are regional, so you have people coming from long distances. Car parking is obviously very important for, because they can't take public transport, they can't avail of parking rides, etc., etc. So, I mean, any potential issues for for patients come May, in terms of people driving long distances and being unable to get parking?
I think the issues that we have persist in terms of the long queues in the Royal for the visitor car parks, and that's well documented. We would obviously seek, and we continue to seek, to try and improve access to car parking for our patients and families and those who are visiting our sites. It is a very difficult and complex situation. There's a lot of pressure on our visitor car parking, and it is documented that, yes, we have a lot of staff accessing visitor car parking, so there's a lot of change to happen with the implementation of the legislation in terms of how we then manage that visitor car parking for those visitors and patients.
In terms of looking for additional location sites, and even some of the other methods that you talked about, trying to encourage people to car share, park and ride, active travel, how are all of those other things progressing?
Yes, we have a big focus on sustainable travel alternatives for our staff. So we have a service where we can provide individual travel plans for our staff and provide them with support and resources around all the alternative options, including bus, train and park and rides. At the minute, we pay for park and ride use from Blacks Road for our staff, and that's a temporary situation because it's an unfunded cost pressure for us. And the reason we put that in place was to try and attract staff away from parking in visitor car parks where they pay charges, to get them to where that meets their needs. So that runs Monday to Friday and 7 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. So those staff who can avail of that. And we would do a lot of road shows with staff. We get staff stories in terms of people who walk to work, use public transport to put those forward. And certainly we do have some increasing uptake in some of those schemes. However, we still have very high single car usage. In relation to looking at other areas and where we can expand car parking, we look at on-site and off-site options. They all involve cost if we were to either build or we were to purchase land or lease land. And that's a big difficulty for us in terms of any funding to do that. We have a business case that we prepared in 2024 for a modular car park at the Royal site. However, we've been unable to secure any funding to date. Also, there would be significant risk with obtaining planning permission in relation to that. And the experience that capital development colleagues have had with the children's build is that no planning approval was granted for any additional car parking associated with build on site. And there's definitely a very restrictive stance taken in relation to any additional car park by planners for Belfast. And certainly the focus is put to us to focus on our travel plans in terms of site-wide and sustainable alternatives for staff travel.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to move on around the room. Dan?
Thank you, and thank you for that. Can I just go straight away to the Royal? Because this is something I get a lot of representation about, and in fact I was at a meeting with Jennifer Welch recently where I raised this particular issue. I mean, I do think that the Royal are in danger of going to lose valuable staff because of the lack of parking provision for staff. If you are a nurse or a doctor from, I don't know, Ballymena, travelling down to the Royal, one of the things that was suggested to me is that you might want to go to the Blacks Road car park and then come into the Royal from there. Now, I have no idea what time of the day you'd need to be up at in order to travel from Ballymena to the Blacks Road to get a bus down to the Royal, do a 12-hour shift and do the same thing back home again. So I think that we sometimes have unrealistic expectations for what staff are expected to do. I just want to set that out there, because I have listened to a number of staff, and I think, and this isn't you're trying to manage a very difficult situation, but I just do want to put that on the record of the committee. I've listened to a number of staff. One member of staff said it's the most stressful part of her day. And she manages in a very stressful environment in the hospital, but the most stressful part of her day is actually making that journey and making that work. And I think we owe staff better than maybe what we're doing. And this is not your fault at all. You're managing an extremely difficult situation, which I think is important. When I was talking to Jennifer Welch, we discussed the issue of trying to share permit allocations. How is that? So in other words, I don't know, consultant, say for example, is only actually at the Royal 2 days a week and maybe at the Mater or somewhere else only requires that for 2 days a week. If that's done on a regular basis, is that an option that you're looking at?
Certainly, with the introduction of ANPR cameras and better data around entrance and exit from our car parks, already we do issue more than one permit per space, so there's already a multiplier in there. And certainly when the cohort of staff changes or potentially changes after needs-based assessment, then we'll be reviewing that and where we can then increase the number, and that will be because some people only come in for part of the week and others the rest of the week. So certainly we would be continuing to monitor that once we have that data and information. I suppose just to go back on a point, it is a very, very stressful situation for all of our staff.
Yes.
And there's a lot of pressure on the Royal site. One of the key criteria was if for shift workers, and it was a key priority criteria, who work early and late shifts and live more than an hour away in terms of transport journey, they're in the priority criteria. So trying to address that and then offer the alternatives to those who can take those alternatives up. But it's something that we would be keeping under review, and we do at the minute. So we do have some capacity in our staff car parks at the minute, and some afternoons will be less busy than others, but we need to really interrogate the data and ensure we are effectively using our car parks once we fill them up.
Thank you. I know this is very, very difficult for you. Just two more questions. Jeff, you're the South Eastern. Why has the cost of car parking in the South Eastern Trust gone up at such an exorbitant amount?
Well, our costs are still in line with the regional norms for car parking for those that charge, so I don't believe it's gone up to an exorbitant cost. They are well within the bounds of other hospital car parks.
Were they lower to start with? I have had.
They had been frozen for about 10 years.
I had a number of colleagues say to me, just as we're about to introduce free hospital car parking, the Ulster has done the opposite and is now charging a lot more for car parking.
No, that wouldn't be my experience. While our prices had remained very low for probably about 10 years without moving. So yes, there's been a bit of an adjustment, and that was mainly around when there was huge increase in cost of living and inflationary pressures. But they are now, and they remain still within the bounds of the envelope that other people were charging for similar sites.
Similar hospital sites similar hospital sites.
Yeah.
Perhaps you maybe could write to us just outlining those car parking charges, because a number of colleagues have asked me about that very specifically.
Are these staff or are these members of the public?
Both.
Okay. Yeah, certainly
just
so
that we have an answer to go back to someone.
Sure, absolutely. I'll give you the data with comparative across the region.
Thank you, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Paul, I'm really surprised that you discuss the legislation but don't tell us how much it's going to cost to enact.
Well, the legislation was a private member's bill, So it was a bill in 2022.
But you must by now have a concept or an idea or an amount in your head that says it's going to cost whatever.
We do. It's going to cost £7 million a year.
It's going to cost £7 million per year.
And that is the lost revenue. So that's the revenue that we would expect to collect.
So that is the cost. Do you anticipate that will increase, or?
Well, that would. Well,
generally, I mean, I'm just thinking of prescriptions, for example. So we started off at a lower amount and we have gone up.
Well, it would be, as your previous question to Jeff, about that car parking charges will increase over time in line with inflation or the rising costs. So that's £7 million cost. If we had still been, if the charges weren't abolished, then we would expect that income to increase year on year in line with inflation. So
is the Minister content? We had a delay in the legislation. Is the Minister content that the legislation goes ahead?
The legislation was delayed because there were issues about the putting the contract in place for the new technology. That's no, as I've set out, that's no longer the case.
So there is no issue from the Minister, even in this constrained budgetary situation that we find ourselves in relation to this legislation, because that is not my information.
Well, if you've got what's your? Can I ask for clarification as to what your information is?
Well, it has been indicated to me from a number of sources in the department that it would be useful to have another delay in relation to this because of the budgetary situation.
Can I just clarify who in the department?
Oh no, I don't. I'm not speaking up there, Neil, at all. Not at all. That might just be. That's a step too far, Paul.
There's obviously an issue for me that I am responsible for car parking policy, and that there are people who are not responsible for car parking.
So I just want to know.
Just interject.
Is there an issue?
I think what we're interested in here is official department policy.
Yeah.
You're here to represent the department, to give us the view. And so, I mean, the view of the department is...
What is the view of the department that this is not a problem, there's no issue whatsoever?
That's not what the view of the department is. The department, as you were briefed before Christmas, the department is facing significant and substantial financial challenges in the current financial year, and as we move forward through the budget period, we are facing unprecedented financial challenges, so that will require consideration to be given across all lines of expenditure in respect of whether we can, of savings that can be made in order that we can bring the health and social care sector back to financial sustainability.
And has the Minister asked for a delay in the implementation of the legislation?
That's a matter for policy, and that's a matter for advice, which you'll appreciate that I'm not at liberty to divulge. At the current time, we are working to implement the legislation as has been enacted.
That's a less than satisfactory answer. I'm not asking you to go outside of your remit at all, and we'll leave it at that. But I do think that there have been requests for the legislation to be delayed, but that has been denied. But I'd just like, I think the committee deserves clarity on it. That is my view, that the committee deserves that clarity on that.
And for a change to occur, that would require new legislation. And as soon as there would be a need for that new legislation, the committee will be advised as soon as possible. Obviously, there would be a requirement for executive approval, and it would be inappropriate for me to comment on something before the executive is making a decision.
And will the executive be making a decision on it in the reasonably near future?
I can't say. I'm not party to the deliberations of the executive.
Thank you very much.
Danny?
Thank you, Chair. I didn't think Diane was going to give up her anonymous source there.
No.
I'd have to declare an interest just before I'm starting. I'm an employee of the South and Eastern Trust, and as a nurse, a bank nurse who works in the South and Eastern Trust, I currently pay in the public car park to do shifts, as do many of my colleagues. And they have found, and it's been reported to me, that the prices have gone up quite significantly. and certainly I think even for an early or a late shift, they pay £6.50.
That's correct.
Yeah, which is a significant.
So, the price for a shift for parking over 8 hours is £6.50, but that's a public car park price. So we would encourage, and I know you may want to ask questions about this, should be aware of the alternatives to parking on site, which would be the park and ride. Plus, if anyone in the South Eastern Trust wanted to worked late shifts overnight, they could automatically get an evening and weekend pass to park on site as well. And that's a free option for them as well. So there's a free option off site and on site for out of hours.
Certainly I'm aware of a lot of staff who still have to pay and are on waiting lists for car parking passes. And
there's no more waiting lists. That was, we dealt with the waiting lists back in last year. So that was all dealt with by, from memory, February time last year.
So there are no waiting lists for anybody?
There is no waiting list on the Ulster Hospital site.
Right, certainly that.
I don't know where you get. You're more than welcome to come and see me, and I'll go through that.
Told you.
But I think it should be noted that a lot of these staff, and particularly nursing staff, do work long shifts, 12, 13 hours. They work over weekends, they work on social hours, and they work bank holidays.
I suppose, Danny, I acknowledge that, and it is something that we do want to do better at. And what we're hoping, just to give you an example, is when AMPR come in, I would estimate at least 10% of the public spaces at the moment are filled with staff paying a public rate and choosing to pay a public rate. When AMPR comes in, as Paul had explained, that means that those staff won't be able to gain admission to those public car parks. So what will happen is in the first few weeks and months, staff will see that there is actually spare capacity sitting in the public car parks because that would have been used by staff parking there. So what we hope to do is, over a number of weeks, to have a look at what that spare capacity looks like and then reallocate it to staff permit holders. So we will be converting over a period of time those public car parks to start public spaces that had been used by staff who were choosing to pay a public rate to permitted staff who will be allocated a space based on their need to use the car parking.
Did that have an impact on the availability of bank staff coming in to fill shifts?
No, it shouldn't do, because bank staff can apply for a permit in the same way as anyone else. We don't mind if it's bank staff, agency workers, any other types of workers on the site can apply for a permit. There's no differentiation.
From a couple of other issues I wanted to ask. Now, the trusts have obviously, all the trusts have spent money on the AMPR, number plate recognition system. Where does that money come from? Does that come from your budgets internally then? And how much did it cost?
I think there was a capital budget allocation to the trusts in 23-24 of £5 million. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, this is all before my time in post, so, but I think that would.
That's all the trusts have completed. I think in your statement you said that it was up and ready to be operational in May. So all the trusts have installed all this and it's all ready to go from the 1st of May?
Yes.
Yeah, so at present all the cameras are installed. There's over 180 cameras installed. We're going to be installing 120 tablets from the 16th.
180 cameras across where?
Across hospital sites in Northern Ireland.
180 right across, okay.
Yeah. There's going to be 120 tablets. These are touchscreen terminals that are the user interface for members of the public to register their vehicles. They're going to be installed from the 16th of February, and it'll take about a month. And we've also, there's 2,500 new signs that have been purchased as a result of this. So it's a considerable amount of capital's been required. So at present, all the cameras are operational. They're not on. Because the legislation hasn't been operationalised in car parks. Some of them are on in restricted areas, set down areas, double yellow lines. Those ones are working on some sites. The tablets haven't been installed on purpose because they're not needed until closer to the legislation, and we don't want to start putting things up and confusing members of the public. So all of that's in train to be implemented within the next few months and by May. And just to come back to you, in terms, I can give you an example. In the South Eastern Trust, the actual cost, the net cost of this will be in the region of about £70,000 to £100,000 a year extra for this system for us. So on top of our loss of income, there's also a financial hole of getting on for £100,000 per year as a result of the legislative changes.
That's just in the South East.
That's just us, yeah. So this is going to cost a lot of money. I mean, it's on the public record, I suppose, how much money, how much income is going to be lost, but there is additional funds, revenue that will have to go out on a recurrent basis. There's no funding for that, no funding allocated for that.
Can I ask as well, the 3.5 hour time limit? Now, whenever somebody is in breach of that, they'll be able to extend that. If they don't extend that, will that mean a PCN is automatically generated?
Yes, so I'll give you some examples here. I was hoping you might ask these questions, so I come prepared. So there are basically three types. I know.
You don't often get that in this committee, do you?
So there are basically three types of visitors or patients that will come to the sites. The first one really is a patient receiving ongoing medical treatment. So that would be someone who, for instance, on our site might be going to renal, McMahon, or to cardiac rehab. Those who go onto a white list, probably at their first visit, and they'll be dealt with, so they're exempt. The second one's where currently you might know, if you work on the wards, we have exemption certificates. These are at the discretion of the ward manager. These might be people with relatives of people who are staying for frequent visits to a loved one, or it might be someone who's at outpatients quite frequently, or those kind of scenarios. That will still go ahead. A piece of paper will still go to the security control room, and they'll be put on a white list as well, so they'll be exempt. And then what you're left with are the others, which you're describing, the 3.5 hours. So that 3.5 hours, just to give you a bit of background, using the ANPR cameras, we looked at least a month, might have been 6 worth of data across Northern Ireland, and we found that 80% of all vehicle movements on the hospital site will be in and out within 3.5 hours. If we dropped it down to 2.5 hours, that became 65%, and at 3 hours it was 70%. So it seemed to us the fair thing to do, and a sweet spot that 3.5 hours, 80% of all site users didn't need to do anything. They come on site, do their business and go. So it makes it effortless in a sense for them. But then you have people that need to stay longer than that 3.5 hours, which is the nub of your question. So in those situations there are these touchscreen terminals that will be around the hospital sites, and each, depending where you are, for instance, unfortunately, ED will require a longer stay than an outpatient's clinic.
Certainly with the weights in ED at the minute, they can be
Exactly.
19, 20 plus
So
hours and days. So.
That will have a longer extension. You go there, you register your vehicle, and it will kick any action into the future. And depending on which department and in fact what trust you're in, they set their own parameters, because it's up to individual trusts. So what we will also do, though, just to add a bit of control around it, because I know in the past Alan has talked about control and turnover of spaces and had some concerns about that. We will be making it so that the patient, the relative, the driver will be able to extend it a couple of occasions. We haven't got, it depends on the site, maybe 3-4 occasions at a touchscreen terminal. But after a while, or if that happens so many times within the month, they'll be directed to a central office. And at that stage, the car parking team will be able to see, have you got an identified need? Should you be on the white list? Or are you someone who's parking here inappropriately and you shouldn't be? And they'll be able to identify. So that's how it's going to work.
I do think that does place an extra burden on patients who are coming into A&E and waiting long periods, and then they have to worry about their car park and a possible fine.
I know. And that's an unfortunate fact of the solution. We didn't want this. We wanted to carry on. ANPR is the only technology here. We've tried to be, when we're looking at the figures, we're trying to be as reasonable as we can. 80% of the people won't need to do that. And if someone's waiting in A&E, there will be a touchscreen terminal in A&E. They will be able to extend it for a long period of time. So that's the best we can do with that technology.
Okay, thanks. Colin?
Thank you for that. Can I just go back to that because I'm a bit confused now. Does that mean that they get 3.5 hours free car parking, or that they pay for 3.5 hours?
No. There's no charging. 3.5 hours is the maximum amount of time they can stay without interfacing with any technology.
Okay.
So you could come on site tomorrow to have a meeting. If you were in and out within 3.5 hours, you wouldn't need to do anything. Okay,
so there's no payments then for
Not
patients?
from May, no.
Right. Then, just in terms of staffing, how many? I see there's figures in there in the paper. Of about 11,500 staff using about 5,800 spaces. How many staff are there overall that would want a space, and how many spaces are there?
I think the example in the Belfast Trust, where there was 4,000, asked for 1,300 spaces.
It varies considerably per site. Belfast is probably the most difficult and challenging site in terms of more than double the amount of staff wanting to take the spaces that are available, the permits that are available. Whereas on other sites, that's not an issue. The city site is quite different for us. Capacity and demand are broadly the same for staff car parking, although it can be very, very busy. But Royal is probably the most difficult, and the Ulster would be difficult in terms of capacity and demand. But it varies considerably from site to site.
But is there an overall figure just of how many spaces you have over the health network, and then roughly how many people are looking to use that?
We would need to ask, but the problem in asking is that everybody go, oh well, I'm getting parking space then. You would, by asking the question, we would have to ask the question, and secondly then, by asking the question, you would give rise to expectations, oh, we're going to get a car parking space. So we'll have a look, but I don't think we can provide that answer across the health and social care sector.
I think that the devil is in the detail in that particular question, because some sites it's shared visitor and staff car parking. Some have specific staff, like the Royal has specific staff car parks and visitor car parks. Some have multi-stories which are shared. So when you go from site to site, it varies considerably. So it's quite a complex piece of information to put together and read across each site.
I can give you an example. On the Ulster Hospital site, we've got about 2,200 spaces. 60% of those spaces are staff spaces, and there, for every one space, there is 1.9 permits issued for each space. So we use our estate as well as best we can. The priority there, as you can see, is 60-40 to staff. And that's why I'm saying we really genuinely appreciate the pressures of the nursing staff, but we're doing everything we can to maximise that resource for them.
Did this piece of legislation overreach? Did it promise too much? Did it promise what it can't deliver?
It's not for us to comment on legislation that's been set by politicians.
I'm not asking you to comment on the legislation. I'm asking about, did it overreach? I mean, is there more demand from what there actually is available?
I think it would have been useful, I think as a lesson learned, that to more fully consider the implications of the legislation before it was passed.
I think if you go back to Hansard 2022, I raised quite a lot of these concerns in advance, and so did Belfast, and these were foreseeable. We are now going through a series of compromises to make things work, and it's becoming very clear now what those compromises look like. So whilst we will be doing our best for the public and for the staff, the environment that we're going to be working in is going to be very different, and it's going to be a lot more challenging to manage for us.
I actually think it's been a really valuable lesson, A, on private members' bills, B, on trying to collapse mandates so that there's not enough time to rigorously go through the exact details of what will come out the other end, and about ensuring that we take into consideration all of the information that we hear from officials. And I'm quite happy at times to say that there should have been more consideration even given by the likes of myself into some of that. But that constrained time, whenever you're right down, and we're coming now to about 12 or 13 months left of this mandate, and there's going to be a raft of private members' bills, and I think it's really important for the public as much as anybody else that we are very, very careful about this legislation, because the ramifications of it can be that it absolutely stymies the delivery. And we do have huge amounts of staff that felt that they were going to get free parking and they're now not, and you're being left to try and find the alternative, and the alternatives aren't great. I know you've no other option, but if you're doing a 12-hour shift and you're finishing at 7 o'clock in the morning, to have to then get a minibus to wherever you then get your car to then get home, like that, I know lots of people say that just adds so much time onto their day, and that it's not practical. But I certainly am taking it as lesson learned, and I appreciate that it's left you in a really, really difficult position. So good luck with that.
Conversely, we shouldn't forget the spirit of what the legislation is. Just so, I mean, there are difficulties, but there are a whole lot of staff out there who are getting free car parking spaces, and that's what the intent is. So I want to thank you very much for coming before us today. Really appreciate.
Aye.
Sorry, Alan. Sorry, I didn't see it.
All right, Chair. No problem. I was in late as usual. Jeff, you had referenced there 70 to 100,000 costs in the South Eastern Trust alone. Would you be kind enough to provide the committee with a breakdown of each trust? The cost?
Unfortunately, I'm
Sorry,
South Eastern
I
Trust.
referenced that.
Anne-Marie that would be able to do that. I can give you mine now, but
apologies. I also asked as well, and maybe I'm looking at this very selfishly, but I have two elderly parents. How user friendly will these interfaces be, particularly for the older community?
We are working with a contractor that is works across the UK in a lot of NHS organisations, and we are reliant on their expertise to make sure that the touchscreen terminals are going to be suitable. But we really acknowledge that sometimes this technology isn't going to be suitable for elderly or vulnerable people, or people in an emergency where car parking is the last thing on their mind. It's not ideal. What I can say though is part of our research, our reaching out. We have gone to been invited to a disability group in Bangor, and been there to listen to their concerns and try to see what we can do to address their concerns in this. But it's a series of compromises. We didn't want to be here.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Apologies. Thank you. Okay, moving on just to item number 8, SR 2026/5, the Breakfast Foods Amendment Regulations 2026. Can I refer members to papers at tab 8, page 86. So including in that is a memo at page 87, the SL5 at page 89, and the SR at page 90. There's an explanatory memorandum at page 100. So the committee first received a briefing from the department on FSA officials briefed the committee on the SL1 on 26th of June 2025. So following that briefing, the committee agreed by a vote that it was content with the merits of the policy, and that the FSA Food Standards Agency make the statutory rule. The Food Standard Agency has advised that there have been no changes to policy content since the SL1 was submitted to the committee. So can I ask if members are content with the SR? Okay.
Oops.
What that was. So if so, can I ask to formally agree that the Committee for Health has considered SR 2026/5, the Breakfast Foods Amendment Regulations NI 2026, subject to the Examiner of Statutory Rules report, and has no objections to the rule. Okay.
Content.
Thank you. Okay, item number 9. Written briefing from the department on waiting lists, red flag cancer lists, PEGs, surgery, etc. So, briefing is at page 126 of our main pack. We had this last week, and we agreed to defer it for a week to allow us an opportunity. So there was a number of issues raised last week of potential issues that we would go back to the department on. So, Clare, can I ask you just to maybe read them out so that we're not rehashing them again?
Yeah, certainly. There was a question in relation to the figures and the reduction of the waiting lists. We wanted a further breakdown of how those figures were made up, whether that was all procedures, whether it was people coming off a list. So there was an issue raised in relation to that, so it was a full breakdown.
So could we also, I mean, that there's a very good point, but could we also get a breakdown on the waiting lists that patients are under? So, for example, you know, by like whether it's gynae, hip replacement, ENT, etc. Dan?
No, I was listening to the Cancer Research UK presentation this morning, and they made the very valid point that using the 62-day measurement actually masks, because we don't know how many people are you know, way over and beyond it. So they were asking in terms of cancer, and I think this is a very useful one to ask for a breakdown of all of the waiting lists for cancer across all tumour sites. And then that would give us a much better idea of the number of patients who are on the list across all the tumour sites, and the waiting times in relation to those.
I was going to make that point. Further to that point, I think if we could also ask if it's possible to get the reasons for the delays. I mean,
Yes,
red flags
yes.
is very important, so we need to understand why patients aren't being seen within the time frames that they should be. So whether it's workforce issues, whether it's imaging equipment issues, whether it's endoscopy procedures. So I mean, I agree with Dan's point, but I think we should ask further if there is a specific reason, because only by having the totality of the knowledge can we actually reduce it. Colin?
I don't know if I'm wrong in this, because did we defer from last week to this week so that we can then pick up the questions that we want to ask about the paper? So can we ask about the information that's in it for more clarification?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the one that was I don't know if these figures are available separately, but the one about breast cancer, where it kind of went from some people were getting the reasonable service and some were getting the terrible service, but then it seems that then whenever you iron it all out, it went down to like 6% that were actually getting the service in the right time. And given that some people were getting an okay service, then if it's dropped as an aggregate down to 6% whenever it's went to regional, some people must have been getting a really poor service. You know, because if people were getting good and then people were getting bad, it should have landed somewhere in the middle. But it seems that the entire thing has just gone right down to I mean, it couldn't go much further than 6% at the time reaching the target. Is there a way that we could ask for some explanation as to how, you know, what were the figures in the background, and how, you know, whenever you bring something that's good and something that's bad into the middle, it's ended up being so low? And the other one was the explanations that were being given by the department. I know I had done, I can't remember, it was one of the radio shows on it, and the rebuttals that were coming back from the interviewer, which were being fed by the department, was but that was the last set of figures and everything has improved since.
Yes.
And it seems very frustrating that we're published and given the last quarter's figures, and yet then the minister comes out to rebut them with the more up-to-date figures, which are better. Is there a way of asking why we can't get the figures monthly or something a wee bit more regular? Because if the department is armed with the information right up to date to rebut what we're querying, which is on a quarterly basis, it seems like we're not on a fair field there in terms of transparency.
Yeah, good point. And in fairness, now, I mean, I made the point last week, going to make it again, that we met with Professor Mark Taylor, and it was a useful meeting, but we didn't have the briefing until 2 days after. So certainly moving forward, we need the briefing in advance of any of that, and he did explain, you know, in terms of some of the figures working through Encompass. So there may be good rationales for it, but I think it's important that we get that. Linda?
Hello. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Just I had raised last week, and I think, I mean, for me it still stands. It's not about waiting times, it's about what are the outcomes. I want to understand what are the outcomes as a result of these waiting times. So even on Colin's last point around, you know, how bad were things in some areas, if it was really good in some areas for it still to be bad everywhere. Well, it was really bad in my area, in the Southern Trust, really, really bad. So people were waiting 16 weeks on red flag breast referrals. And the only trust that it was good in was the Western Trust. So none of the other trusts were good or anywhere close to good. So that's why it is still so bad. So now they think we should be grateful if it's 9 weeks or 10 weeks, you know, and I gave the example of when I was 18 or 19 and I discovered a lump, you know, I was at the GP on the Monday in Daisy Hill on the Wednesday, got a phone call on the Tuesday, Daisy Hill on the Wednesday, and had it removed on the Friday. You know, and I'm not saying, I know we're in a much more difficult position now, but that was when we had not got the expertise around these things that we have now. So like I'm not young. I'm talking about 30 years ago. So like this is really, really, really bad. So I want to understand what are the outcomes, because I'm seeing it day and daily, just as I'm sure many of you are seeing it day and daily about what the actual outcomes are. People are being diagnosed too late. And if any treatment is possible, its impact is minimal. So I would like to get some understanding of what are the actual outcomes. You know, we heard this morning what cancer research was saying on Good Morning Ulster about the outcomes. So we kind of know, but I'd like to know, understand it on an individual basis. Don't mean individual person, I mean bit like others in the different spheres, like you mentioned yourself, Chair, around the breast cancer, around whatever the different types are. I just want to understand what this means for people.
I mean, that's a very good point. We did agree a specific focus on red flag waiting lists, because I mean there is good news elsewhere, but obviously cancer is so vitally important because it is time constrained. So that's vitally important. I would add too, because I mean, whilst there is good news in some aspects of the waiting list and they're coming down, and the executive is investing to ensure that is the case, there are still more people on the waiting lists in general. So I mean, I think that we should potentially, I mean, they've given some kind of general explanations in what they've said about demand outstripping capacity, but I think we should maybe potentially ask for a deeper assessment of that, and then maybe potentially ask for the rationale, if that is the case, why they decided to redirect a portion of the funding for waiting lists elsewhere. Yep, Dan.
No, I was actually just going to, because I do think it's, there is a paragraph in this letter which indicates that 73.5 million was used to redirect to the wider budget. And I don't think that that's defensible given the actual waiting list. I suppose the other thing that we can talk about all of the data around the waiting lists till the cows come home, and we'll not make any difference in it. We'll just have talked about it. I do think that we should be asking the department for a plan to reduce red flag cancer waiting lists that isn't just lumped in with the elective care plan, but that is definite and separate. I think this is such a core issue for people. And I mean, I was doing another case this morning on a person, you know, diagnosed with cancer, and I'm doing this too often. And I'm really concerned that there isn't a specific plan to reduce cancer waiting list times. And as Linda has said, the Cancer Research UK document actually indicates that because people are delayed in receiving treatment, then our outcomes are poorer. And it's a very, very concerning situation. So I suppose really what I'd like to see is, one, that we improve the data and understand more about the lists by getting the full lists across all sites, not just the 62-day target or whatever, and that they ask whether the department is going to bring forward a specific plan and not just something that is part of the elective care framework, I think is important.
Everybody content with all of that?
Just actually, just you said something there, Dan, that sparked in my head. Just a query: the likes of the 62-day and the 14-day for breastfeeding, is that like UK and Ireland wide standards? Like we could be saying 62 days here, but the standard in England could be 32 days, or is that a recognised standard across the National Health Service? It's maybe just to be sure that we're really trying to strive to achieve a standard that's lesser than other places, because that would be worrying too if you were in other parts of the UK or Ireland and could get access to treatment a lot sooner.
Okay, we'll check all that.
Sharon, in terms of the paediatric
Go ahead.
issues, so there are some good figures in this, and that has to be acknowledged and so on. But some of them are in quite areas where there's a smaller number of patients. So, for example, cleft lip lists and so on. Now, that I'm not minimising the impact of it. It's hugely life changing to have that surgery, but they're in the lesser. And we still, I think it would be really good again to have the data on paediatric waiting lists. For, say, for example, first consultant appointments across all of the range of services, because the last time I asked for this, it was quite significant. Those people who are waiting for first consultant appointments, I think is quite important. I think that Children's Services continues to struggle, and I do think that there's been an enormous progress in the PEG surgery. Like there has been enormous progress in some of them, but it'd be useful to know what the overall picture looked like as well.
And following on from Linda's point, same point could be made here. The report acknowledges that some children have waited an awful long time for surgery or admission, so it would be useful to get an assessment of long-term development harm caused by that. Okay, content to move on. Okay, moving on then just to correspondence. So, can I refer members to correspondence in the main pack from page 136, including an index at 137. So, there's tab 11.3 is a response to queries in relation to issues raised at the budget briefing in December. So the response provides a breakdown of the savings and trusts and the SPPG. Are members content to write to the department just to seek a further breakdown in relation to some of the savings outlined? Because they've lumped others with no detail, like in 20 million. So, surely we would expect to know a bit more detail than just others for 20 million. It's a lot of money. I, for one, would like to know just how that 20 million is broken down, but they've a number of just very generalised figures. I think we could certainly do with greater detail if people are content with that.
Yeah, are we getting a briefing on
budget?
Yeah, reasonably soon.
19th of February, maybe.
Just
off the top of my head.
Within the 8-week consultation period, yeah.
Yes, 19th of February.
So that is within the 8 weeks, isn't it? My math's pretty right. Okay, so also in terms of correspondence, tab 11.9, page 168, is a response regarding COT and HSE partnership impact on Fermanagh. We had asked for that down there. So I think what we should certainly be doing is passing that information on to SOAS if people are content.
What's that, sorry, Chair?
It's 11.9. So
okay,
it was the Chief Executive. So just for my own clarification, because the correspondence came from the Chief Executive, Neil, who had resigned. So I presume he's staying on just until the replacement. I don't know. Maybe we get some clarification on that. Next one then is correspondence, page 3 of the table papers regarding chemotherapy delays at Laurel House. So I'm just wondering if anybody has any questions or commentary on that. Okay. And can I just also refer members to correspondence at table papers, page 5, it's the updated statistics on violence and aggression against staff. So, I mean, this is something we've all raised individually and collectively from the committee. I mean, I think it would be just worth writing to the trusts, because the figures, every time we get them, are horrific. They're hard to read, and I mean, all violence against staff is unacceptable. I think, you know, we really do need to start to see some kind of action and reduction. So it would be worth maybe writing to the trust just to see what they're actually doing about it. And I know this feeds into our visit next week, the visit to Antrim. So I encourage everybody, if they're available, to go to the visit in Antrim, where we're going to get a look at the workings of the body cam videos and conversations. I know that night me and Danny were there over Christmas. We asked about it, and they were all at that time very complimentary about the effect that it was having.
Just remember, the issue about fans, there's something in my head, I might have dreamt it, but did we not get a presentation like over a year ago? And I had asked at that stage, would it not be possible to get more detail in the figures in terms of like how many of the assaults may have been like medical based, as in maybe somebody's in the middle of a fit, or somebody's in the middle of an episode of some form, or had maybe some predisposed medical condition that resulted in it, versus, because I think sometimes, and it's not to detract from it, but it's just to understand the transparency. We sometimes think that, like, you know, there's 32,000 assaults, it's like 32,000 people went in and started throwing digs around them, whereas I don't know, maybe even Danny, if you've got a sense of from your work, if I mean, is there a balance between the two? Is it about half and half, or is it mostly just literally people coming in and
it's a huge range of different things, like, and it is horrendous for the people who suffer it. I think there's a huge degree of underreporting as well.
And one of the things, that's a good point, we should maybe ask for about that, but also the location of it. So I mean, are they in EDs? You know what I mean, like, because that would also help.
Sorry, Chair, just to say, we were briefed on the 20th of November on this, and the outcome of that was officials agreed to forward to the committee further information, data collated, informal assessments with staff relevant to the emotional effect on staff, and also further information how the framework could deal with capturing data on detail of violence and aggression, incidents on staff with the aim of learning context and incident details in order to inform training and support needs for staff and patient safety. So it is. So that's. I'm not sure whether we've got a response to that yet. No, we haven't.
Okay.
So we haven't. So that was from the last briefing at the end of November.
Could I ask, do we have any information about current prosecutions? Sorry, that have followed from that?
Yeah, coming to you next, Linda.
Oh, sorry, Linda. Sorry.
Go on ahead, Danny.
Right.
Sorry, Linda, I jumped in there.
But you're okay. I'm sorry, I was only coming in on that point. Are you on that point, Danny? Yeah.
About the number of prosecutions from violent incidents.
Go ahead.
No, I was just to ask if we could get some information.
I will follow up and ask that. Go on ahead, Linda.
So I think Colin's point is actually really, really valid and very important. And I do think we need to understand that information, because when the news was reporting on this, the whole conversation was around ADs, but actually a significant number, I would imagine, happen in the very settings that we've been talking about today, in settings where you have people who are vulnerable due to mental ill health, and those who are learning disabled and lack capacity, because there can be quite a bit of aggression in those settings, non-intentional. You would absolutely, certainly not want to be bringing in bigger sentencing for to deal with those individuals. I mean, I have personal family experiences where they've been badly injured whilst working in hospital settings, but would not have even dreamt about making a statement, because they knew that that person was not well when they did that. There was no intent to hurt or harm them. It was in a state of panic where they were flailing and were frightened themselves. So, and that could have been through addiction, mental ill health, or because they had learning disability or vulnerabilities. So I think we do need to understand that, because we need to get the balance in this. We're talking today on the Adult Protection Bill and about protecting vulnerable adults, and then, you know, we're on radio stations and things are talking about we need to come down harder around these assaults, we need to understand, are they actual assaults? Or what is the percentage that are actual assaults? And they absolutely need to be dealt with. And there absolutely needs to be, need to be taken on, needs to be tackled, and they need to be sentenced appropriately. The charges need to be appropriate in the sense and the punishment needs to be appropriate for what they're doing to people who are trying to do their day's work. It's not acceptable. But we do need to have a better understanding of it.
Just
very briefly, I don't disagree with that at all. But I understand, and it's just to give you a flavour of how often this is happening, that 2 weeks ago there was a very, very serious assault on staff in Daisy Hill. And just before that there was the same serious assault in Craigavon. This is something that staff deal with. And just this week I had a nurse who came off shift at 8 o'clock in the morning, devastated because all night long someone had actually made her life very, very difficult. And, I don't think that we should tolerate this on behalf of staff. And yes, understanding the context, I understand that someone may have a psychotic episode. I understand that some people may feel frustrated. But it's never right to be violent towards the people who are there to help you. So I do think there is a balance to be struck, but I think that maybe some staff feel that there isn't appropriate enough follow-up action. Now I am assured, because I've contacted the Trust on the other issues, I am assured that the Trust is taking all necessary action in relation to the last number of assaults I was talking about. But it is incredibly difficult for staff. Imagine the anxiety of going in to do your work, knowing that this is very possibly going to happen to you.
No, absolutely. I mean, staff, regardless of what they're working, particularly within a healthcare setting, should be free to do it without feeling threatened or having actual acts of violence imposed. I mean, and I think this committee is taking it very seriously. This is continually raised and we're continually probing. I think additional information that we've asked for just helps us understand it a wee bit more so that we can suggest better solutions. And as I say, from early indications, the body-worn camera seems to be working, but we'll get a better assessment of that next week, and then we'll just continue to keep a focus on it, because the point you're making, Dan, is right. We really need to certainly see those figures reduced and reduced to zero. Okay, moving on to the forward work program. Sorry, are people then content, or have any other issues you want to go ahead, Danny?
Yeah, on 11.11, just in the changing places in hospitals, the email from Laura Conley. I see the recommendation is to invite Mrs. Conley to attend a committee event on complex needs and respite, co-hosted by the Autism Reviewer. I've been contacted by another mum, Christine McClements, who had a very, very similar episode, very similar issue in the Children's Hospital. If we could also invite Christine along as well. And maybe just write to the Trust and ask them about the provision of changing places within their hospitals, so that parents with children with complex needs would be catered for when they're coming for appointments, and they shouldn't be being changed on toilet floors or anything like that. It's disgusting.
Sure, I have written to the department on that. It was almost a response that I could written myself, but we can do so again. And I wrote to the two main hospitals in my own constituency, both Causeway and Altnagalvin, and again they had no future plans currently to provide what, as Danny says, should be a basic requirement in hospitals. Simply down to money.
So we could, Keith, you're saying
we could write the department to collate a response on behalf of all the trusts in relation to the issue.
Yeah, that's a good point.
If there's any policy on it as well. Thank you.
Okay, moving to the forward work programme, members. So draft forward work programmes at page 216. So just to alert members that we have a meeting next Tuesday. It's very important. We have the visit, and then we obviously have our own committee meeting on Thursday. So next week we have 3 engagements. Everybody content with the forward work programme?
I just highlighted at the start, I don't know if you were here, that the policing board has a conference on for all members next Thursday in It's not that far away from the Antrim Hospital. I know it takes 4 of us out straight away, but I don't know. I haven't been to one of them before. I don't know if Linda has, as to whether there's scope to be able to nip out of those or whatever, or if there's an expectation that we're at it all day. So it might put a number of us under pressure next Thursday.
Linda?
Yeah. I wouldn't say that it's easy to nip out of, because you will miss part of the these are the board development days that happens 1 for 2 days at the start of every year. But you could. It's not impossible. If it's something you felt you really wanted to do, Colin, you probably could, but it'll depend on what item we're at that point and whether you feel you can be, particularly given you're the only member on the board, it's probably a bit easier for me, to be fair. I think I probably have to give my apologies, because I think I'd be told I have to be there.
Okay. Well, in terms of the visit, we don't need a quorum. For the other meetings, it's important that we have quorum. Okay, members, any other business? None. Date, time and place of next meeting, next Tuesday, 27th January, 10 a.m, and it's in room 21. Okay, and we've already got the thing.